Hey guys, welcome to Calm History. Tonight we travel back, not just centuries, but thousands of years, to a world of gold-tipped temples, sun-bleached limestone, and a river that refused to stop flooding. You're standing barefoot in warm, silty water. The Nile's breath brushes your ankles. Overhead, ibis drift in lazy arcs as reeds whisper in the breeze like they've got secrets to keep. You smell wet earth, dust, and something cooking in clay pots nearby, probably lentils, maybe locusts. You'll hear shouting in a language no one's spoken for 3 millennia. And you'll watch, wide-eyed, as one of the longest living civilizations in history takes shape around you. But fair warning, you probably won't survive this. The heat? Relentless. The hippos? Mean. And let's not even talk about the parasites. Or the neighbors with clubs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're on the banks of the Nile, somewhere around 5000 BC. Not quite Egypt yet. Not really anything yet. No pharaohs, no pyramids, no gold-plated gods peeking out from temple shadows. Just mud huts and fishermen. Maybe a dozen communities stretched thin along the river's ribbon. People live by instinct and routine. Harvest, fish, survive. But the Nile doesn't just water crops. It whispers patterns. Every flood, every retreating wave leaves behind a promise. You can build something here. Early settlements spring up near places like Merimd, Fayum, and Badari. You squat near one of them now, watching women grind grain with stones worn smooth, while a boy chases a goat into someone else's vegetable patch. The homes are simple, wattle and daub, and the tools are stone, yes, but smarter every year. Pottery appears, fired in open flames, shaped like water lilies, some decorated with patterns you can't help tracing with your finger. And here's a fact that might tickle your sleep-deprived brain. One of the oldest known examples of eyeliner comes from this period. Crushed malachite and galena stored in tiny jars. Even before hieroglyphs, we wanted to look fierce. Society's not complex yet, but the bones of a future bureaucracy are buried in the mud, crop storage, animal domestication, burial rituals. These early Nile dwellers are already separating the world into order and chaos, what will one day become Ma'at and Isfit, the cornerstones of Egyptian cosmology. They just don't have the fancy words yet. Here's your first open scholarly argument of the night. Where exactly did Egypt start? Some archaeologists point to the south, near modern-day Sudan, claiming cultural borrowings from Nubia. Others say the delta came first. Still others argue it wasn't about geography. It was about who figured out how to weaponize water control and social guilt fastest. Around 4000 BC, bigger settlements like Nakada and Hierakonpolis start popping up. These aren't just towns, they're experiments. You've got public buildings, elite burials, specialized labor. The dead are laid on mats, curled like sleeping cats, dusted with red ochre. A bit eerie, a bit beautiful. And now something curious is happening. You notice the pots here are different. The motifs are more abstract. Boats, dancing figures, mythical beasts. Scholars call this, Nakada too, culture, but to you, it feels like ambition. These people aren't just living anymore. They're imagining, inventing, planning. Still, everything depends on the river. Every year, the Nile floods. Every year, it withdraws. Like clockwork. Like magic. And these early Egyptians build their world around that rhythm. Like syncing your heartbeat to a drumbeat that never skips. It irrigates your crops, carries your gods, and eventually, it'll carry your soul. But we're not there yet. You hear a shout, then another. You glance downstream and see a group of men dragging something heavy from a boat. A hippo carcass? No, it's pottery. Trade goods. They're from a settlement you've never seen, and they're offering obsidian blades. In return, your village gives them cattle and salt. It's an early economy, and yes, someone's already skimming off the top. And just so you don't doze off yet, here's your quirky fact. Archaeologists discovered ancient Egyptian dentures made of gold wire binding teeth together, possibly as early as this Proto-Egyptian period. Fashion or function? Historians still argue whether these were practical dental devices or part of burial bling. The sun sets. Fires are lit. Someone nearby sings a wordless tune, maybe a prayer. You lie back on a woven mat, gaze up at a sky you don't recognize. No pyramids yet. No Cleopatra. Just stars, wind, and the low hum of a civilization beginning to stir. You wake to the soft lap of the Nile against bundled reeds and the rustle of morning trade. It's 3500 BC now, give or take a few generations, and things have shifted. The air smells different. Less like wilderness, more like civilization warming up. Someone nearby is arguing about goats, loudly. You watch two men in wrapped linen gesture wildly over a scribbled token of ownership. Property disputes. That's how you know society is evolving. Settlements have grown, especially along the river. You can feel the tension. This isn't just survival anymore. This is ambition with boundaries. Nakata, Hierakonpolis, Thynis, each one acting like it's the center of the universe. You could call them proto-kingdoms, or just neighbors who've had enough of each other's cow theft. And here's a fact for your sleepy brain to snack on. Archaeologists have found entire cemeteries filled with flint knives, ivory combs, and imported lapis lazuli. Lapis! That stuff came from Afghanistan. Someone was already outsourcing luxury. As you walk between rows of houses in one of these towns, you pass a man painting a boat on a wall with red ochre. Not a little dinghy, but a sleek, narrow craft with paddlers and rhythm, an image you'll see repeated all the way into Egypt's classical age. Boats aren't just transportation. They're sacred. They carry fish, priests, even the sun. Speaking of sacred, you pass a burial site where the dead are still in fetal position, but now they're buried with grave goods, pots, beads, tools, the occasional dog. Death, it seems, is no longer an end, it's a transition. And transitions need accessories. You pause at a large mud brick structure. It's elevated, lined with torches, and guarded, not by soldiers, but by scribes. This might be a proto-temple or an early royal residence, depending on who you ask. Historians still argue whether these Nakata II elite compounds were political, or spiritual, or both. Honestly, it's probably both. What's the difference when your gods wear crowns? Here's your fringe tidbit. We've found clay figurines with exaggerated hips and breasts, thought to be fertility goddesses, or dolls. Or maybe just someone's idea of aesthetic perfection. Ancient Egypt wasn't short on body image experimentation. Now step into a workshop. It's dark, damp, and smells like copper and ambition. Men are hammering out tools. Copper blades gleam beside stone ones, new tech elbowing the old aside. And outside? Artists carve animal motifs into slate palettes. You see a lion devour two antelope, stylized in ways that'll become the blueprint for later hieroglyphs. Language is still mostly oral, but you can feel writing trying to break through. And you know that clay tablet someone dropped? It wasn't for art. It's part of an accounting system, possibly used to count bread, beer, or textiles. Bureaucracy is beginning to bloom. Somewhere, a proto-accountant is smiling in their sleep. Tensions mount as resources get tighter. Trade routes overlap. Border disputes flare. The Nile doesn't change, but people do. Each kingdom wants to control more river, more grain, more people. You hear it whispered in the markets, sung in boat songs, a great unifier is coming. In Hierakonpolis, you glimpse someone special. He wears a white crown, the Hedjit of Upper Egypt. His name is Scorpion, maybe, or someone like him. His image is carved on a ceremonial mace head showing him digging irrigation canals. But don't be fooled. This isn't about agriculture. It's about control. And so begins the slow fusion of divine kingship and statecraft. Leaders stop being just chieftains. They become semi-divine. Their tombs become proto-mastabas, rectangular, tiered, more permanent than any home they lived in. Power, it seems, is worth being buried for. Open scholarly question of the night: was there really a war of unification? Some argue it was a long, slow merger via trade, marriage, and low-stakes conquest. Others swear by the mace heads and smiting scenes, insisting someone got punched hard. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, like most family reunions. As the section winds down, you climb a hill overlooking the Nile. Below, a caravan of oxen drags goods from one kingdom to another. Above, a falcon circles, a sacred bird to some, a political metaphor to others. You wrap your linen tighter. There's something coming. Something big. You feel it in the wind, in the shifting pottery styles, in the narrowing eyes of every ambitious local lord. Civilization is no longer just blooming. It's consolidating. The air is tense. Not stormy. Egypt doesn't really do dramatic weather, but politically tense, like a kettle about to boil. You're standing in the dusty courtyard of a shrine in Thynis, a town that's about to become much more important than it looks. The walls are covered in falcon symbols, reeds, and what you now recognize as early versions of hieroglyphs. A priest sweeps the sandstone floor. A scribe yawns beside a tally of offerings: linen, barley, perfume. Everything is being counted. Because someone is coming. His name is Narmer, or maybe Menes. It depends on which ancient king list you believe, and whether you trust the guy who compiled it 2,000 years later while probably sipping date wine. Historians still argue whether Narmer and Menes were the same person, a symbolic composite, or two guys who got awkwardly merged in post-production. Either way, you're witnessing the birth of Egypt as a single nation. Imagine two worlds: Upper Egypt, the southern stretch of the Nile, narrow and fierce. Lower Egypt, the wide, fertile delta in the north. For centuries, they squabbled like siblings with boundary issues. Narmer, or Menes, your choice, decides enough is enough. He wants both crowns. And not metaphorically. Literally. He marches north, wielding alliances, military might, and one seriously oversized ceremonial mace. You hear whispers about battles fought at places like Buto and Memphis. Onlookers later claimed the ground turned red with blood, but let's be honest, someone probably just spilled pomegranate wine. Still, power shifts. Towns fall in line. Local rulers bow. And eventually, there's a ceremony unlike anything the Nile has seen before. The Narmer Palette, a slab of green siltstone discovered in a temple deposit at Hierakonpolis, shows it all in visual code. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, clobbering a kneeling foe. On the other, he sports the red crown of Lower Egypt, reviewing rows of decapitated enemies with calm detachment. You trace the raised reliefs with your fingers. The falcon god Horus floats above. Myth and monarchy are fusing in real time. This isn't just conquest. It's branding. The double crown, Skent, becomes a visual slogan. I own both lands. I'm your guy now. And so Egypt is unified around 3100 BC, give or take a decade or three. Bureaucracy booms. Standardized weights, trade routes, and cult centers appear like mushrooms after a flood. The capital is said to have moved to a strategic spot between the two regions, Memphis, a place you'll return to again and again. Here's your quirky tidbit. Narmer's name is thought to mean angry catfish, which is either deeply threatening or completely hilarious. Imagine leading an army under the banner of a furious bottom feeder. Downstream, villagers notice the change. Taxes start arriving in tallies and jars, not clubs. The temples get new instructions: sacrifice this, count that. And the scribes? They are thriving. Papyrus scrolls now record land ownership, granary totals, and legal matters. You see one boy hunched over a wooden tablet, muttering symbols like prayers. His father nods. He'll be a civil servant someday, maybe even get promoted to overseer of fish paste storage. The elites are getting richer, and you can tell. Jewelry becomes subtler but more precise. Gold inlays, turquoise beads, carved ivory combs shaped like lions, hippos, or palm trees. These are not baubles. These are symbols of divine order, Ma'at made wearable. Meanwhile, the dead are demanding more. Mastaba tombs, those stepped, rectangular structures, are being built outside major towns. You walk past one and overhear instructions. Make the false door facing west. Always west. Why? Because that's where the sun dies every day, and in Egypt, death is a journey, not an ending. Open scholarly question: did Narmer's unification involve mass violence? Or was it mostly strategic marriage, religious alignment, and high-stakes diplomacy? The archaeological record is thin on gore but rich in symbolism. The answer may lie somewhere between myth and PR stunt. And now, a subtle but profound change. You notice statues of falcons perched higher. More temples bearing Horus's eye. Narmer's successors, the first dynasty kings, aren't just rulers. They're living gods, intermediaries between humanity and the divine. The throne becomes a sacred object, not just a seat. The rituals expand. Kings rule for decades, building monuments and reputations that extend far beyond their earthly years. As you walk the halls of an early royal compound, mud brick, palm-beamed, incense-laced, you feel the chill of legacy being constructed. Every step echoes with a whisper, "We are eternal." A crocodile slides into the Nile nearby. You remember that even gods can be eaten if they're not careful. But Egypt? Egypt is no longer just a place. It's an idea. A system. A story told in stone and blood and eyeliner. And it's only just begun. You're trudging through the desert edge now, sand creeping into your sandals. When the horizon splits open, a pyramid rises like it's punching through the sky. And not just any pyramid. This one is a step pyramid, tiered like a wedding cake made of limestone and ambition. Welcome to the Old Kingdom, traveler, c. 2700 BC. The era of pyramid builders, god kings, and possibly the most exhausting workweek in prehistory. You're standing in Saqqara, the necropolis of Memphis. There's clamor all around, stone being dragged, copper chisels ringing out, orders barked in the crisp dawn. Overseers with flared kilts pace the site, trying not to look overwhelmed by the thousands of laborers digging, hauling, and heaving under the desert sun. These aren't slaves, by the way. That's a modern myth. Most workers are seasonal peasants, compensated in beer, bread, and prestige. 6 pints of beer a day, in fact. Hydration was taken very seriously. And towering above all of it, a structure like nothing the world had ever seen before, the Step Pyramid of Djoser, built around 2667 BC. And the man behind the blueprint? Not the king himself, but Imhotep, yes, the same one Hollywood turned into a mummy villain. In real life, he was an architect, priest, physician, and polymath. Basically Egypt's Leonardo da Vinci, minus the beard. This pyramid is 6 stacked mastabas, each one slightly smaller than the last. It's the first time anyone dared to build in stone at scale, and it's dazzling, white limestone catching the morning light like a cosmic reflector. You run a hand across its base. Smooth. Cold. Eternal. This isn't just a tomb. It's a manifesto. A statement that says, "I'm divine, I'm rich, and I fully expect to be remembered for 5,000 years." But here's a quirky bit. Beneath the pyramid lies a labyrinth of underground chambers, fake doors, and decoy tombs. Why? To confuse tomb robbers, of course. And it worked. For a while. Step into the adjacent mortuary complex. Courtyards. Chapels. Colonnades carved like bundled reeds. Everything here screams ritual order, Ma'at made physical. The king's soul isn't just being buried. It's being transformed. From mortal to immortal. From human to Osiris, the lord of the underworld. Across the next century, the pyramid game levels up. Enter the 4th dynasty, Egypt's golden age of ego and limestone. First comes Sneferu, the tryhard king who built not 1, not 2, but 3 pyramids, including the famous bent pyramid. Yes, bent as in, we miscalculated the angle and had to change course halfway up. But honestly, it still slaps. Then comes his son, Khufu. And with him, the showstopper, the Great Pyramid of Giza. You walk the causeway at dawn, watching its shape cut against the light like a perfect triangle drawn by a god with a ruler. Originally sheathed in smooth white casing stones and capped with gold, it would have gleamed so bright it probably gave the neighbor's temple envy. So how did they build it? Ramps? Counterweights? Alien contractors? Historians still argue whether the massive blocks were dragged on sledges over lubricated sand, or if there were spiral ramps inside the structure. Either way, it took decades, tens of thousands of workers, and a logistical machine so efficient it might have made a Starbucks district manager weep with envy. You stop to watch a royal funeral procession pass. The priests chant. The mourners wail. Perfume smokes from incense burners. The coffin is adorned with ankhs, scarabs, and the eye of Horus, symbols now universal. All this spectacle leads to one sacred goal: to preserve the body for eternity. Mummification is advancing fast now. Linen wrappings, natron drying, and that famous hook-up-the-nose brain extraction, which, fun fact, might not have been quite as common as pop culture suggests. Inside the mortuary temples, wall carvings come alive, scenes of fishing, farming, banquets, hippo hunts. These aren't just pretty pictures. They're magical insurance policies, a cosmic to-do list for the afterlife. Need bread? Just point to it on the wall. Convenient. Everywhere you look, gods multiply. Not just Osiris, but Isis, Thoth, Anubis, Hathor, a whole divine HR department managing the dead. Pharaohs are no longer just rulers. They are intermediaries, walking contracts between gods and humans. Their words shape reality. Their temples bend time. But there's a cost. All this grandeur? It's draining the state. Priests grow powerful. The royal court bloats. And as pyramids get bigger, so do egos. The 5th dynasty builds sun temples and leans hard into Ra worship, like a divine marketing pivot. Meanwhile, bureaucrats start slipping their own names into inscriptions. One even calls himself friend of the king, which, if you have to say it. And here's your open debate for tonight: did all this pyramid building actually undermine royal power? Some scholars believe the massive tombs bankrupted the central government and seeded the decline. Others argue it was worth it, the ultimate PR campaign for divine rule. After all, we're still talking about them now, aren't we? You end the evening atop the Giza Plateau, cool wind at your back, watching stars creep across the dark velvet sky. Below, workers sleep in stone barracks. Scribes light oil lamps. And deep within the pyramid? A single chamber holds the sarcophagus of a man who called himself a god. No one's opened it in centuries. And maybe that's for the best. Dawn breaks over Giza again, but this time the air feels heavier, not with heat, but with politics. You're not just witnessing monumental stonework anymore. You're watching power being passed like a gold-plated baton through generations of increasingly cautious kings and endlessly scheming advisors. Welcome to the 5th and 6th dynasties, the twilight of the Old Kingdom, when pharaohs are still divine, but viziers are getting bold, and the mortuary priests are growing more territorial than a crocodile with beachfront property. You drift down a hallway in a sun temple near Abu Sur, built under Userkaf, the first king of the 5th dynasty. The place isn't huge, but it's shining. Literally. Obelisks, polished altars, and an open courtyard for daily offerings to Ra, the sun god who's suddenly taken center stage. Remember when Horus was the big name in town? Not anymore. Ra worship explodes, a cosmic PR campaign fueled by kings desperate to stay relevant. You pass walls covered in reliefs, goats being milked, bread being baked, scribes keeping tally. Everything looks serene. But you, lucky dreamer, get to see behind the curtain. Kings are still building pyramids, sure, but they're shrinking. Materials are cheaper. Foundations wobble. Some structures, like those of Unas or Teti, barely stand today. Yet something extraordinary is happening inside them, the pyramid texts. Carved on walls deep in the burial chambers, these spells and incantations are the oldest known religious texts in the world. They describe the pharaoh's journey through the underworld, his merging with Ra, and his eventual transformation into a shining, resurrected being. And here's your quirky tidbit. One spell literally instructs the dead king to leap skyward like a grasshopper. Because, yes, sometimes divine ascension involves bug metaphors. But outside those sacred chambers, things aren't so divine. Gnomes, regional provinces, are becoming more independent. Their governors, called nomarchs, are growing bolder, richer, and suspiciously fond of having statues made of themselves. Bureaucracy isn't just expanding, it's metastasizing. More scribes, more officials, more people whose job is to check the work of the people checking the other people. And who's trying to hold it all together? The viziers. Take Tahotep, for example, a vizier under Pharaoh Djedkar-Isisi. He writes a book of wisdom, the Maxims of Tahotep, filled with advice like, "Don't be arrogant, listen more than you speak," and "Do not eat bread in the presence of someone who is fasting." So, classic HR energy with a dash of cosmic anxiety. You wander into his tomb, intricate scenes of daily life, feasting, scribes, and children playing. This isn't about kingship anymore. This is about legacy management. The elites are no longer content to live in the pharaoh's shadow. They want their own spotlight. And here's the scholarly debate. Was this a peaceful decentralization, or a slow-motion collapse? Some argue the viziers and nomarchs simply filled gaps left by aging kings. Others see it as a quiet coup, the beginning of Egypt's first real identity crisis. You drift now to the edge of the desert, to a mastaba tomb that belongs not to a king, but to Mereruka, a vizier under Teti. His tomb is massive. His titles? Endless. Overseer of the royal record keepers. Chief lector priest. Director of the toilet papyrus archives. Okay, maybe not that last one, but close. It's almost like Mereruka wanted to remind the world. I ran the kingdom. The pharaoh just posed for statues. Meanwhile, everyday Egyptians go about their business, tending flax, raising cattle, making perfume, brewing beer. You watch a mother paint her child's eyelids with green malachite. To keep away the evil eye, she murmurs. Also, fun fact, that eyeliner doubles as insect repellent. Fashion meets function. But the cracks are spreading. By the reign of Pepi II, who rules for a reported 94 years, historians still argue whether that's even physically possible. The monarchy is a flickering ember. The provinces run themselves. The priesthood hoards wealth. Tomb robbing is quietly becoming a profession. And Pharaoh? He's still technically a god. But a very old, very tired one. One of Pepi II's letters survives, sent to a military officer. Hurry! Don't delay! It's short. Urgent. Desperate even. You picture a weary old man, surrounded by silent courtiers, trying to hold back a tide that doesn't care about crowns or spells or pyramids. And then, like a sandstorm that arrives without warning, the old kingdom just fades. No dramatic invasion. No epic fall. Just a slow unraveling. Egypt slides into a period of fragmentation, famine, and feuding. But you'll get there soon enough. Tonight, as stars blink above the shrinking pyramids, you lean against a crumbling stone and wonder how something so mighty could grow so fragile. Turns out, even gods need administrators. You awaken to silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that follows something collapsing. It's around 2200 BC, and the old kingdom is gone, not with a bang, but with a prolonged, bureaucratic sigh. You find yourself in a once bustling village near Ibis, where the wheat granaries sit half empty and temple offerings have grown suspiciously modest. The pharaoh's name is still carved into steel and wall, but no one's listening quite like they used to. You've stepped into what's known as the First Intermediate Period, or, if you want to be dramatic about it, Egypt's Dark Age. But let's set the record straight. This wasn't total collapse. Egypt didn't vanish into ash and legend. It splintered. Think of it like a government furlough. The central authority stopped showing up, so the locals started making their own rules. And funerary cults. And warlords. The country fractures between Heracleopolis in the north and Thebes in the south, with a dozen smaller factions in between, each with its own king, its own priesthood, and, naturally, its own complaints. The national identity? On hold. The infrastructure? Faltering. The river? Still flowing. That's the only constant now. The Nile, patient as ever, dragging silt downstream while people try to remember how everything used to work. You walk through the dusty remains of a provincial town. A former nomarch has declared himself ruler. His title is long and elaborate, but the palace roof leaks, and the soldiers are mostly teenage boys with dented copper daggers. The tomb art here is different too, less formal, more human. You see grief etched into stone faces. Scenes of hunger. Livestock wandering unherded. Life is still happening. But it's uncertain, fractured, raw. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some tombs from this period include curses, not for religious reasons, but as warnings. Do not open this tomb or the crocodile will eat you, the snake will bite you, and the scorpion will sting you. Ancient security systems, basically. Written by people who couldn't rely on the state anymore. In Thebes, however, something is stirring. While the north stumbles through administrative chaos, the south, more isolated, more tight-knit, begins to remember what unity felt like. Local rulers here start calling themselves servants of Ammonius, and align their authority with the divine, not just the political. It's subtle at first, temples refurbished, rituals restored. But soon, there's a boldness in the air. And here's where historians love to argue. Was the first intermediate period truly a time of decline, or a kind of creative renaissance hidden beneath the political rubble? Because the art here? Stunning. The literature? Heartfelt. Personal letters appear in tombs. So do humble scenes of fishing and farming. For the first time, non-royal individuals depict their lives in ways that feel relatable. It's like ancient Egypt finally went off script. One example you stumble on, a limestone stela carved by a provincial scribe. He doesn't praise the king. He praises himself. I fed the hungry. I clothed the naked. I was good. In a world where divine kingship falters, individual virtue steps in. Still, the hardships are real. The Nile's flood cycle, normally clockwork precise, has faltered. Too low, and the crops die. Too high, and the homes drown. Either way, famine creeps in. The grain silos empty. The people start whispering prayers with cracked lips. In one town, you see a marketplace turned into a battlefield. A neighboring faction raided in the night. The stolen cattle are already gone by morning. The temple priest shrugs. The gods are asleep, he says, matter of fact. It's not just the gods who've gone quiet. Royal records grow thin. Stone quarries fall silent. Trade with Byblos, Nubia, and Punt sputters out. The lines on maps blur. And yet Thebes rises. A family of Theban rulers, possibly descended from Intef the Great, begins to challenge the north. At first diplomatically, then militarily. The fighting isn't flashy. It's slow. A city seized here, a canal dammed there. But the tide is turning. Egypt's slow-motion balkanization is giving way to something familiar: ambition, reunification, dynasty. Before you drift off completely, here's one last sensory detail. You stand atop a crumbling wall, watching two boys toss stones into a dry irrigation channel. Beyond them, the Nile glints faintly, unbothered. Somewhere, priests whisper to Ammonius. A scribe dips his pen. And a horseman, Theban, armored, resolute, gallops north. Egypt is wounded, yes, but not defeated. The wind picks up along the banks of the Nile, not strong enough to shake a temple, but just enough to lift the dust from abandoned shrines and old battlefields. Egypt isn't whole yet, but it's no longer crumbling quietly either. You've crossed into the thick of the first intermediate period's chaos arc, and things are getting messy. The tension between the Heracleopolitan kings in the north and the rising Theban house in the south is no longer passive-aggressive. It's aggressive-aggressive. Political insults are turning into skirmishes, and skirmishes into sieges. You passed through a village recently? Liberated, for the third time this season. Someone has scrawled over the old governor's name on a wall with fresh plaster. A child nearby explains. We just call whoever shows up king now. Decentralization has hit its peak. Temples are underfunded. Tombs are reused, sometimes with the original occupant politely scooted to the side. The economy is limping along, powered by local bartering, shriveled wheat harvests, and the occasional shipment of cedar wood if your Namarch has connections. Even the scribes are nervous. And when the scribes get nervous, you should get nervous. Here's a quirky detail for your brain to nibble. In some towns, power was so fractured that scribes began issuing their own local decrees, like actual pseudo-laws. Don't take more than your share of the granary, one reads. And don't use someone else's donkey without permission. Ancient HOA energy. But the most revealing evidence of this chaos? The literature. You find a worn scroll, laid out beside a statue with no face. It's the Admonitions of Epure, a poetic lament from this time, or inspired by it. Its lines are riddled with images of reversal. The rich are poor, the poor are rich, the river is blood, women are barren, but birth is everywhere. Historians still argue whether this text reflects true historical memory, or if it's apocalyptic fiction, and ancient. We're doomed. Blog post. Either way, it gives you chills. Still, amid the disorder, one city is playing the long game, Thebes. Its rulers, in Tef 1, 2, and 3, are building not just armies, but legitimacy. They carefully align themselves with the gods, fund temple restorations, and declare that they alone uphold Ma'at, the sacred order. They adopt the title, Son of Ra, rebranding their regional kingship as divinely sanctioned. Meanwhile, up in Heracleopolis, things are starting to rot. Not metaphorically, literally. Tombs of 9th and 10th dynasty kings there are poorly constructed and frequently looted. Some rulers barely leave a trace. One infamous pharaoh, possibly named Katie, is remembered more for burning grain stores during a siege than for any wise policy. Not exactly the legacy you want. Now imagine the country as a long, tense rope, pulled taut between two hands, Thebes and Heracleopolis. Then, with a sharp tug, Thebes tightens its grip. Enter Mentuhotep II, the Theban king whose name you'll want to remember, not because he's flashy, but because he finishes what Narmer started, a second unification of Egypt. You follow his army up the Nile, past collapsed walls and half-burned statues. The final battles aren't epic in scale, but they are decisive. Heracleopolis falls. The northern princes either bend the knee or vanish into anonymity. Egypt is, once again, a single kingdom, but this time forged in hardship, not limestone. Mentuhotep doesn't just stop at military victory. He moves fast to restore central government, reopen trade routes, and, most importantly, rewrite the story. His tomb at Deir el-Bahri, carved into the cliffs of western Thebes, becomes the template for future kings. He mixes old kingdom grandeur with new, Theban style, terraces, colonnades, hidden chambers. You walk its halls now, cool and quiet, your fingers trailing over stones still smelling faintly of incense. Here's your fringe detail. Mentuhotep's reign also marked the increased importance of Ammonius, the Theban deity who had, until recently, been just a local sky god. Now, he's merging with Ra. Ammonius Ra is born, an invisible force fused with sunlight, mystery, and bureaucratic approval. You'll be seeing a lot more of him soon. And here's the scholarly debate to lull you deeper into your dreams. Was Mentuhotep II a restorer or a reformer? Some say he simply brought back the old kingdom system. Others argue he invented something new, a tighter control over provincial powers, stronger religious centrality, and an early form of what we might call propaganda. As the section closes, you sit beside the Nile, now calm again. The moonlight glints off boats returning to reopened harbors. A priest of Ammonius chants softly from a reed platform, his voice steady, almost serene. And behind him, etched in stone above a temple gate, for simple words glow in your lantern's light. The two lands are one. You stir to the sound of chisels tapping in harmony, and the rustle of linen robes sweeping through temple corridors. Gone are the cries of raiders and grain thieves. You're in a different Egypt now, reunified, confident, and ready to rebuild. Welcome to the Middle Kingdom, circa 2050 BC, where kings still wear crowns, but it's the pen that rules more than the sword. Your guide through this new era? Mentuhotep II's successors, most notably a man named Amenemhat I. He's no divine son of a god king, he's a career official, a self-made man. Think of him as ancient Egypt's middle manager turned monarch, and boy does he have plans. He moves the capital from Thebes to Ijtai, strategically placed in the Fayum region, a location historians still debate because its exact spot hasn't been found. You're welcome to try digging, but bring water and an umbrella. Amenemhat I's rise marks a new kind of kingship, less mystical, more managerial. His court is stacked with scribes, accountants, and regional diplomats. And they don't just run the country. They document everything. Bureaucracy becomes a form of storytelling. You walk through halls filled with scribes hunched over papyrus, tallying grain yields, tracking laborers, and drafting those sharp, poetic warning texts carved into tombs. Touch this grave, and may your limbs rot faster than old beer. Charming! Here's your quirky detail. Amenemhat I reportedly co-wrote a piece of royal fiction called The Instruction of Amenemhat, a sort of political thriller from beyond the grave. In it, the dead king warns his son never to trust anyone, especially advisors. Assassination can come even in the bath. Good night, sleep tight. But let's not get too paranoid. Egypt during the Middle Kingdom is thriving. Under Senusret I and II, temples are rebuilt. Roads and canals stretch through the land like carefully laid hieroglyphs. The Fayum Basin becomes a breadbasket, thanks to irrigation projects that divert Nile waters into lakes and fields. Trade flourishes. Lapis from Afghanistan, incense from Punt, cedar from Lebanon. Gold pours in from Nubia like it's going out of style. And yes, Egypt is conquering again. The southern frontier is pushed deeper into Nubia, where fortress after fortress rises along the river. You climb one of them now, Semna or Urinardi, and see graffiti left by bored soldiers, one complaining about how much beer was rationed. Bureaucracy, conquest, and grumbling about rations, some things never change. But it's not all empire building. This period gives us some of the most elegant literature in Egyptian history. You sit beneath a sycamore tree and listen to a scribe recite the tale of Sinew, a dramatic saga of exile, homecoming, and the fear of being buried in foreign sand. Or maybe The Eloquent Peasant, a story about a poor farmer who demands justice with words so beautiful, even the judges take notes. In these stories, you hear something new, empathy. The idea that regular people, not just pharaohs, matter. It's subtle but powerful. Egypt is becoming more self-aware. And here's your open debate for tonight. Was the Middle Kingdom Egypt's real golden age? Sure, the pyramids came earlier, and the empire later, but many scholars point to the Middle Kingdom as the moment when order, economy, and culture all hit a perfect balance. Not too rich, not too poor. Not too divine, not too chaotic. Like porridge Goldilocks would approve of. Still, nothing lasts forever. Toward the end of the 13th dynasty, the gears start to grind. Kings come and go too quickly to remember. The bureaucracy becomes bloated. The Nubian campaigns slow. The canal systems clog. And worst of all, foreigners show up, not as guests this time, but as contenders. A group known as the Hyksos begins creeping into the delta. They bring with them chariots, new weaponry, and more consonants than the scribes are used to spelling. But we'll get to that chaos soon. Tonight, you sit at the edge of an irrigation canal, the water still reflecting starlight as a priest lights incense and offers bread to a statue of Osiris. Nearby, a young girl reads from a papyrus scroll, her father nodding with pride. This is a land held together not by divine thunder or brute force, but by routine, rhythm, and ink. Egypt has remembered who she is. And for now, she's at peace. The wind shifts as you cross a low ridge overlooking a field dotted with little reed huts and scribes bustling between granaries. You've stepped into the soul of Middle Kingdom Egypt, not the temples, not the palaces, but the scribal schools, the granary offices, the bureaucratic engine that's humming beneath it all. You're in Senusret III's Egypt now, around 1870 BC, and there's something different in the air. It's not just order, it's efficiency. Streamlined, standardized, inspected. Everything smells like papyrus, new ink, and a slightly passive-aggressive sense of duty. This pharaoh, Senusret III, is no soft administrator. His statues show him with deeply furrowed brows, heavy-lidded eyes, and a mouth that suggests he's been disappointed since birth. No smirk, no swagger. Just the tired determination of a king who understands, if you want to run Egypt right, you have to do it yourself. Senusret cuts back the power of the nomarchs, the provincial governors who'd been getting a bit too cozy with their own mini-dynasties. He centralizes control, creating royal officials who owe loyalty to the throne, not their local families. Suddenly, being overseer of the bakery isn't hereditary anymore. You've got to be appointed, and keep the receipts. You peek into a bustling office in Thebes. Scribes are hunched over ledgers, marking grain intake, labor quotas, and tax records. The room smells like ink, sweat, and quiet desperation. One young man's reed pen snaps, and he mutters a curse about being reassigned to the mud accounting division if he makes another mistake. And here's your quirky tidbit. Scribes had their own training manuals, complete with hilarious warnings. One famous excerpt tells students that being a farmer means being bitten by flies, eaten by crocodiles, and cursed by your own oxen. Be a scribe, it says, and you'll never be whipped by anyone but your teacher. Comforting. Scribal culture becomes the ladder of social mobility. Literacy means power. Not just reading, but writing, copying, recording, inventing. A poor boy who learns his hieratic script might end up overseeing construction, auditing temples, or managing estate taxes. Some even become royal advisors. Meanwhile, the military is professionalizing too. You follow a group of soldiers heading south to Nubia, where Egypt has expanded its frontier beyond the Second Cataract. Fortresses dot the river like teeth, Semna, Urinardi, Mergissa, and every one of them watches both the water and the people. Senusret III isn't just worried about trade. He wants control. The local Nubian populations, sometimes called the Medjay, are simultaneously allies, rivals, and eventual Egyptian soldiers. The Egyptian state is absorbing cultures now, not just dominating them. It's all part of the Middle Kingdom strategy. If you can't conquer the world, you might as well administrate it. You pass a temple under construction and watch the foreman consult a blueprint etched on a smooth limestone tablet. Not a drawing, exactly, but a set of coded measurements, orientations, and ritual instructions. The project? A new temple to Moniasare, who is rapidly overtaking other gods in terms of funding, popularity, and office square footage. Historians still debate whether Moniasare's rise was grassroots or royal propaganda. Did the people believe in him more deeply, or did the kings just need a god big enough to justify their reforms? Either way, his temples are growing, and so is his priesthood's power. One evening you walk through a quiet village. You see how the machinery of state touches everything. A farmer's tools bear royal stamps. His taxes are recorded in triplicate. His children are enrolled in work duty cycles by scribes who can barely lift their styluses anymore. Egypt's administration is thorough, exhausting, remarkably effective, and maybe a little suffocating. And yet, there's beauty. Inside a tomb, you witness the most delicate wall painting, a scene of herons standing in a marsh, lotus blossoms drifting in perfect symmetry, fishermen casting nets with practiced grace. You feel it again, that love of balance, of harmony, of Ma'at. Even when the government tightens, the heart of Egypt still beats in art, in ritual, in the rhythm of the Nile. As night falls, you sit on a low step beside a scribe's school. A boy recites lines under his breath. Be a scribe. It is greater than all other professions. It spares you from the hoe. It places you among the wise. The scribe commands, the soldier obeys. The stars flicker overhead. A reed rustles. Somewhere, someone is revising a grain tally to make it look a bit more favorable. And in a granite hall far upriver, a king signs a decree that will outlast his bones. Egypt, now more than ever, is built on words. You wake to the sound of laughter. Not courtly chuckles or priestly hums. This is the high, unfiltered sound of people living their lives. Children splashing in canals, women bartering over onions, a man trying and failing to wrangle a goat onto a boat. The sun is just climbing, and already the air smells like baking barley, crushed lotus, and sweat. You're in the Middle Kingdom's daily heartbeat now, far from the court, among the people. This isn't Pyramid Egypt anymore. This is wig-wearing, coal-lined, crocodile-dung-using Egypt. Because if there's one thing ancient Egyptians excelled at, besides stonework and bureaucracy, it's the art of everyday life, and it's anything but boring. Let's start with fashion. Linen is the go-to. Light, breathable, ideal for a climate that tries to turn every rock into an oven by noon. Men wear knee-length kilts. Women prefer tight-fitting sheath dresses with wide straps. And everyone, and we mean everyone, wears wigs. Not just for looks. Shaving your head was the hygienic thing to do. Lice? Out. Wigs? In. Made of human hair or plant fibers, wigs were curled, perfumed, and sometimes even stored in special boxes with scented cones of fat placed on top to melt slowly through the day. Nothing says luxury like slow-drip scalp oil. And the makeup? Fierce. Green malachite smeared thick across the eyes. Black coal flicked out into eyeliner wings that would put modern influencers to shame. It's not just for aesthetics, it's medicinal. The coal helps reflect sunlight, and even contains lead salts that stimulate the immune system. Did they know that? Maybe. Not. But they sure looked great while staying healthy. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians also made eyebrow wigs. Yes, actual glued-on brows for that perfect arch. Because why age gracefully when you can paste on youth? You pass through a busy household. Mud brick walls, a rooftop used for sleeping, and a small shrine tucked in the corner with offerings of beer, bread, and tiny clay figurines. Domestic religion is woven into every action. Before baking, a woman sprinkles flour in front of a statue of Bes, the household protector with a lion face and a permanent grimace. Bes doesn't look friendly, but that's the point. He's supposed to scare off evil spirits. Think of him as your magical bodyguard with a wild hairdo. And let's talk about contraceptives. Oh yes, they had them. A popular recipe? Crocodile dung mixed with honey and inserted like a pessary. Highly questionable. Highly committed. Other methods involved acacia gum, linen plugs, or just lots of amulets and hope. Scholars still debate how effective these were. Probably not very. But hey, they were trying. You head down to the market. It's noisy, fragrant, and full of color. Vendors call out prices for onions, fish, linen, dates, and, most importantly, beer. Beer isn't just a drink here. It's breakfast. It's currency. It's religion. Workers at construction sites get paid in jugs of it. Priests pour it for the gods. Even kids drink a watered-down version. Thick, cloudy, and full of nutrients, this isn't your modern Pilsner. It's more like liquid bread. As you wander, you pass a perfumer's stall. He's pressing lotus petals into oil with a look of divine concentration. Egyptians loved their scents: myrrh, cinnamon, frankincense. One papyrus even records a recipe for perfume meant to smell like a boat returning from Punt. Historians still argue whether that was a compliment. Further along, you stumble across a small medical clinic, run by a priest-physician with a box full of instruments that look suspiciously like salad tongs. He's treating a man for a pain in the side, which could be anything from a bruised rib to a spiritual imbalance. The cure? A mixture of milk, moldy bread, and magic words. And yes, moldy bread has natural penicillin. Some treatments actually worked. One of the most respected figures in town? The scribe, of course. He's treated like a minor celebrity, someone who can speak to the gods and balance a grain ledger. Young boys swarm around him, practicing glyphs on ostraca, broken shards of pottery used like sticky notes. The scribe groans, rubs his temples, and corrects one particularly tragic attempt to spell hippopotamus. You feel for him. But not everyone has it easy. Many Egyptians are farmers, tied to the rhythms of the Nile. You watch one family anxiously measure the floodwaters. Too high and the crops drown, too low and they wither. The inundation, okay, is both blessing and threat, a god that must be appeased and measured with obsessive care. As the sun lowers, families gather on rooftops. They eat bread, beans, and dried fish. Children chase beetles. A grandmother tells a myth about how Ra got so tired of humanity's whining, he sent Sekhmet to wipe them out, only to regret it and get her drunk on red beer before she killed everyone. Moral of the story? Don't complain. And if you do, at least bring a drink. Tonight, as you rest beside a courtyard garden filled with sycamores and date palms, you realize this Egypt isn't made of pyramids or scrolls. It's made of moments. Of women kneading dough by firelight. Of old men muttering spells as they tie sandals. Of children asking questions about the stars. It's not just a civilization. It's a culture. And it's alive. The sun rises over the Nile Delta, casting a golden shimmer on the water's surface. But something's off. The air is thicker. The accents in the markets sound unfamiliar. The soldiers walking past you? Their armor looks strange, their horses too nimble, their chariots like mooncraft on wheels. You've crossed into the beginning of one of Egypt's more embarrassing chapters, the Hyksos invasion. It's around 1650 BC, and you're standing in Avaris, a fast-growing city in the northeastern delta, where streets bustle with merchants who speak strange dialects and worship gods with oddly shaped beards. These newcomers are the Hyksos, a term the Egyptians later wrote with gritted teeth. It translates roughly to rulers of foreign lands, though you can almost hear the subtext. These guys do not belong here. But here's the plot twist. They weren't invaders in the traditional sense. Not at first. The Hyksos came in gradually, as traders, craftsmen, settlers. They brought with them skills Egypt hadn't mastered yet: horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, new metallurgy techniques, and possibly the stir-fry pan, your late-night kebab thanks them. They set up shop in the delta, did business, paid their taxes. Until one day, they stopped paying taxes. And just like that, they were pharaohs. You walk the streets of Avaris and see what shocked the Egyptian court. This city is cosmopolitan. It has Syrian-style temples, Minoan frescoes, Canaanite artifacts, and, most scandalous of all, foreign rulers calling themselves pharaohs, complete with headdresses and crocodile-shaped scepters. One of the most famous was Apophis, who ruled during the 15th dynasty and once wrote a letter demanding the Theban kings silence his noisy hippos. From hundreds of miles away. The message? I can hear your gods from here. Shut them up. Quirky detail for the night. The Hyksos probably introduced new musical instruments, including the lyre and tambourine. So yes, Egypt's Dark Age also had a killer soundtrack. Meanwhile, down south in Thebes, native Egyptian kings are gritting their teeth and pretending to be polite. But their patience wears thin. The ruling Theban family, kings of the 17th dynasty, have names that pulse with defiance: Sekhmet Tau, Kamos, and eventually, the man who will change everything, Amos-I. But back to Sekhmet for a second. His mummy is one of the most haunting ever found. You walk into a small chapel where his skull is on display, massive wounds, crushed bones, as if he died in battle. Scholars still debate, was he assassinated in his sleep? Or did he fall during a final push against the Hyksos? Either way, his death becomes a rallying cry. You ride with Kamos next, galloping into Delta territory, past burned-out villages and fortified mud brick walls. Kamos doesn't defeat the Hyksos entirely, but he sets the tone: no more compromises. Egypt must be Egyptian again. And then, Amos-I, Sekhmet's younger son, finishes the job. You follow his army, now equipped with Hyksos chariots repurposed with Egyptian precision, as they lay siege to Avaris. It's not easy. The Hyksos fight hard. But Amos pushes them north, all the way into the Levant. Egypt doesn't just survive. It transforms. Here's your open scholarly debate: were the Hyksos villains or innovators? Later Egyptian propaganda paints them as barbaric outsiders, but archaeological evidence shows their rule wasn't especially brutal. Some historians suggest their governance introduced vital technologies and organizational models that helped launch the new kingdom. It's messy. It's nuanced. It's exactly how history works. With the Hyksos gone, Ahmose begins the 18th dynasty, and it's clear, Egypt is back, and she's out for revenge, glory, and very expensive building projects. Before you drift off, you walk back through the ghostly ruins of Avarice. The wind whistles through crumbled streets where Canaanite and Egyptian children once played side by side. A broken chariot wheel lies half buried in the sand. And overhead, a hawk, Horus, watching, waiting, circles once, then vanishes into the sun. Egypt has learned something dangerous. To survive in this new world, she must borrow from her enemies and become something even stronger. The first thing you notice is the sound, bronze on bronze, chisel on stone, the steady thrum of thousands of footsteps. You're no longer in sleepy Egypt. You're in Imperial Egypt now, the new kingdom, born from revenge and raised on ambition. The Hyksos are gone, the kings of Thebes have taken back the two lands, and Ahmose is building something bigger than pyramids, a legacy of power that reaches beyond the Nile. You're walking through the court of Ahmose, the founder of the 18th dynasty, and the mood is unmistakably different from the quiet Middle Kingdom days. His soldiers wear leather and bronze. His scribes are drafting conquest reports. His engineers are mapping Nubia. This is a kingdom on the offensive. Egypt is not just rebuilding, it's expanding. Ahmose is meticulous. He reorganizes the military, reopens trade routes, reasserts control over Thebes, and tosses up a few temples while he's at it, just to remind everyone whose name should be carved in granite. He pushes south into Nubia, retakes gold mines and fortresses, and reestablishes a flow of tribute, slaves, cattle, incense, and, most importantly, gold into Egypt's veins. And the really clever part? He hands out land and titles to his most loyal military officers. You meet one of them, Ahmose, son of Abana, a war hero whose tomb proudly recounts battles, plunder, and promotions. His story is full of swagger and chariots, but he's also deeply loyal to the throne. Egypt isn't just ruling with swords now, it's building a military aristocracy. Here's your quirky detail for the night. Egyptian soldiers wore leather kilts with metal scales, but the truly elite sometimes wore decorative hip sashes shaped like lion tails. Imagine going into battle looking like a fashionable cat. Back home, things are moving fast. You pass new temple complexes rising like sunflowers after a flood. Egypt is flush with wealth, importing cedar from Lebanon, lapis from Afghanistan, myrrh from Punt, and 1,000 kinds of pottery from the Aegean. Markets are booming. Art is thriving. The state has swagger again. And in the background, something else is happening. A god is rising. Ammonius, once just a modest Theban deity, is now fully merged with Ra, the sun god, and crowned as Ammonius Ra, king of the gods, lord of thrones, and, let's be honest, Egypt's most lucrative brand. You visit his growing temple at Karnak, and it feels less like a shrine and more like the ancient world's answer to Versailles. Row after row of columns, decorated in painted reliefs, stretch skyward like stone papyrus stalks. The priesthood of Ammonius grows wealthy, influential, and increasingly bold. They manage land, collect tribute, commission statues, and maybe whisper just a little too close to the king's ear. Historians still argue whether the rise of Ammonius Ra was a brilliant political unifier or a priestly power grab. Was the god designed to hold the country together, or did the priests simply grow rich from the illusion of control? As usual, the answer's probably yes. Ahmose is succeeded by his son Amenhotep I, a relatively peaceful ruler who continues temple building, supports the arts, and refines the bureaucracy. His tomb? Hidden in the cliffs near Deir el-Bahri, along with a secret royal necropolis workers' village. You visit Deir el-Medina, home to the craftsmen of the Valley of the Kings. These aren't peasants. They're skilled artists with pensions, homes, and a surprisingly juicy set of legal records. Here's another delightful fact. Deir el-Medina workers once went on strike when their rations were late. They refused to build royal tombs until they were fed. The world's first recorded labor protest, ancient Egypt invented unions. By the time Thutmose I comes to power, Egypt's ready to go global. His campaigns sweep into Syria and the Levant, crossing the Euphrates. This is Egypt reaching its maximum historical footprint, planting banners not just along the Nile but into foreign river valleys, desert forts, and coastal ports. And wherever he goes, he leaves stele carvings, names, traces that say, "We were here. We are watching." But Thutmose doesn't just leave monuments abroad. Back in Thebes, he's transforming the Valley of the Kings into the new royal cemetery, a departure from the pyramid tradition. Why? Pyramids are expensive. Also, easy to rob. Tombs hidden in desert cliffs? More discreet. In theory. By nightfall, you sit beneath the stars outside Karnak's towering gates. The river hums. Torches flicker in the distance. A soldier nearby sharpens a blade by the fire, telling his younger brother about the sea, about battle elephants in Syria, about the way the king's chariot cuts through the dust like lightning. Egypt is no longer just a land of crops and tombs. It is an empire. You stir under a velvet sky, stars flickering above the sandstone cliffs of Thebes. The embers of the fire beside you are dying, but Egypt's ambition is very much alive. The 18th dynasty is in full bloom now, and you're about to walk alongside a ruler who doesn't just protect Egypt, he rebrands it. His name? Thutmose III. And if Egypt had LinkedIn, he'd be endorsed for global conquest, aggressive campaigning, and exceptional time management. But first, let's talk about his stepmother, Hatshepsut. When Thutmose II died, his son Thutmose III was still a child. Enter Hatshepsut, the king's royal wife and aunt of the young heir. She steps in as regent. But something strange happens. She doesn't step out again. Instead, Hatshepsut assumes full kingship, dons the pharaonic regalia, and, most notably, wears the false beard traditionally reserved for male rulers. Now, Hatshepsut isn't pretending to be a man. Her statues depict her as male, yes, but inscriptions use both male and female pronouns, a deliberate, clever dance around tradition. Her rule isn't about rebellion. It's about continuity, and she pulls it off with grace and limestone. You stand before her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, nestled against the cliffs in elegant terraces and colonnades. It looks like it was carved by wind and divine will, not tools. Incense burns in altars nearby. Her walls tell a story not of conquest, but of trade, especially her famed expedition to Punt. You see ships loaded with gold, ivory, ebony, and baboons, and even a depiction of the Queen of Punt herself, short, stout, and striding boldly beside her caravan. Hatshepsut made Egypt rich not by war, but by opening doors. Here's your quirky tidbit. Among the goods from Punt were live myrrh trees, planted in Hatshepsut's temple gardens. Ancient Egypt, ladies and gentlemen, the birthplace of botanical diplomacy. But history has a hard time with powerful women. After Hatshepsut's death, her successor, now adult Thutmose III, begins erasing her from the record. Her statues are smashed. Her cartouches chiseled off walls. Historians still argue, was this petty revenge? A calculated political cleanse? Or something in between? A way to protect dynastic legitimacy while letting her accomplishments echo quietly in stone. Whatever the motive, Thutmose III doesn't waste time sulking. He launches 17 military campaigns into Canaan, Syria, and Nubia, redefining Egypt's borders and turning it into a true imperial powerhouse. You follow him north across the Sinai, past fortified towns and blood-streaked passes. His most famous victory? The Battle of Megiddo, around 1457 BC, where he performs one of the first known military flanking maneuvers in history. You reach the battlefield with him. The road splits, one safe, one dangerous. His generals vote for caution. Thutmose ignores them, takes the narrow route through the Aruna Pass, and surprises the enemy. It's a rout. The enemy flees. The gates of Megiddo are shut before their own army gets in. Thutmose? He lays siege for 7 months, then wins the city and its wealth. Quirky detail? He apparently had to stage a royal tent outside the walls because protocol demanded he be visibly regal even while camping. Egypt, where even your tent has formalware requirements. Thutmose's scribes record everything. The spoils of Megiddo fill over 900 chariots, thousands of cattle, and a mountain of gold cups, weapons, and armor. Egypt's treasury overflows. Tribute pours in from foreign lands. Diplomats arrive with exotic gifts. One brings a live bear. Another, a dancing dwarf. Back in Thebes, you enter Karnak Temple, now dramatically expanded. Obelisks tower like frozen sunbeams. The hypostyle hall is underway, columns carved like papyrus stalks thick enough to hide elephants. It smells of incense, fresh-cut stone, and ambition. Ammoniasare's name is everywhere. But with all this glory, there's strain. The more Egypt controls abroad, the more complex it becomes at home. Supply chains stretch. Vassals fidget. And the gods? They demand more offerings, more festivals, more wealth. And here's the open scholarly debate for your pillow tonight. Did Thutmose III's empire actually benefit Egypt long-term? Or did it overextend the state's resources and focus? Some say it brought Golden Age riches. Others argue it laid the groundwork for later fragility. Either way, it made Thutmose a legend. As the sun dips low behind the cliffs, you sit beneath a stela carved in his honor. It shows him smiting enemies, offering gifts to Ammonius, and sailing home triumphant. But the real power of his legacy is quiet. It's in the way maps changed, the way kings after him mimicked his titles, and the way temples like Karnak became the beating heart of Egyptian identity. Egypt now walks on the world stage, with chariots at her feet and incense in her sails. And it all began with a queen in a false beard, and a king who would not be denied. The desert air is still, but Egypt is buzzing, with gossip, gold, and gods. You're in the reign of Amenhotep III, the so-called dazzling sun disk, and if Thutmose III made Egypt strong, Amenhotep makes it sparkle. His rule, around 1390 BC, is an era of immense wealth, luxury, and diplomatic flair, where the Nile's floodwaters aren't the only thing overflowing. His court is packed with exotic gifts, letters from foreign kings, and more statues of himself than the average ego should legally permit. You walk through Thebes, now a city of processions and palaces, perfumed nobles and color-drenched courtyards. The temples are enormous. The festivals are constant. And the artwork is smoother, rounder, richer than before, like even the paintbrushes got a raise. The man behind all this is Amenhotep III, son of Thutmose IV. But where Thutmose had focused on conquest, Amenhotep leans into diplomacy and divine image building. He rules for nearly 4 decades and spends much of it rebranding kingship. Less general, more god. You stroll past 2 enormous seated statues, the Colossi of Memnon, guarding the remains of Amenhotep's mortuary temple, now mostly swallowed by floodplain and time. Each colossus is over 60 feet tall, carved from solid quartzite, and somehow says, "Don't ask questions. Just worship me." In his inscriptions, Amenhotep refers to himself not just as pharaoh, but as the living sun, the radiance of Ra, the perfect god. He doesn't just serve the divine. He embodies it. And the people? They go along with it. Why wouldn't they? There's food, music, jobs, and a giant annual party known as the said festival, celebrating the king's continued vitality. Even if he's a bit pudgy. Even if he never actually leads an army. Amenhotep doesn't need to fight. He outcharms the world instead. Here's your quirky tidbit. Amenhotep III had over 700 scarabs stamped with official records. One, for example, documenting how many wild bulls he hunted. Over 100 in one day, supposedly. Sounds suspicious. But it's good PR. And it's not just Egypt that's impressed. You swing by a scribe's office in the diplomatic quarter, where letters from Babylon, Mitanni, and Hutti arrive regularly. These are the famous Amarna letters, clay tablets that form the world's earliest surviving international correspondence archive. Kings of foreign lands write to Amenhotep III like eager fans. "My brother king of Egypt, send more gold. Also, that statue you promised. Also, my daughter misses your luxury oils. These letters drip with flattery and occasional desperation. One Mitanni king even sends his daughter as a bride, cementing alliances the old-fashioned way. Egypt's prestige is sky-high, and Amenhotep III knows it. His palace at Malkata is enormous, filled with gardens, artificial lakes, and painted walls so vivid they make your modern wallpaper feel personally insulted. But behind the incense and gold leaf, something more radical is quietly brewing. The king's son, Amenhotep IV, is watching all of this unfold. And he's not buying it. He sees a priesthood that's too powerful, a court obsessed with image, and a religion that's begun to feel more like accounting than adoration. Most of all, he questions Ammonius Sare's chokehold on everything. So, he begins to whisper about a new vision, a sun not as a god of bureaucrats, but as a pure creative force, a disk in the sky, the Aten. Historians still debate whether Amenhotep III encouraged this shift late in life, or whether his son radicalized on his own. Did they rule together for a while? Was there a co-regency? No one agrees. But you can feel the tide turning. Something revolutionary, something strange, is coming. But tonight, Egypt still bathes in Ammonius' golden favor. The temples thunder with hymns. The river glows with torchlight. Musicians pluck harps by moonlit pools. And Amenhotep III reclines in a perfumed pavilion, surrounded by diplomats, dancers, and offerings from every corner of the known world. It is Egypt at its most serene, most opulent, most radiant. And it will not last. The sun rises over Thebes, but this time, no one's bowing to Ammonius. Instead, all heads tilt toward a different light, a different name, a different god. Aten. Not a figure, not a falcon, not a bejeweled statue shrouded in incense. Just the sun disk itself, casting its rays across a world that is about to be unmade and remade in one man's image. Welcome to the strangest, boldest, most controversial chapter in Egypt's long story. Welcome to the reign of Akhenaten. Born as Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III, this pharaoh comes to power around 1353 BC, and things start off normally. Sort of. But then something shifts. Subtly at first, fewer references to Ammonius, a little more focus on sunlight and open-air temples. Then faster, and louder, and irreversible. Amenhotep IV changes his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and that's just the beginning. He shuts down Ammonius' temples, seizes their wealth, moves the capital hundreds of miles away to a brand new city he builds from scratch, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna. You walk through this new capital now. It's flat, planned, geometrically clean. No giant pylons. No hidden sanctuaries. Just broad courtyards, open-air altars, and sunlight everywhere. Aten is not worshipped in darkness. His presence is pure radiance. The art is different too. Shockingly so. Statues now show Akhenaten with slender limbs, wide hips, elongated skull, and a sagging belly. Sometimes his wife, Nefertiti, is depicted leading rituals. Sometimes the royal daughters are crawling at his feet. There's affection, intimacy, even kisses, unheard of in traditional Egyptian imagery. One wall shows the king and queen cuddling under the sun's rays, which end in tiny, hand-like fingers offering angst to their lips. Quirky tidbit of the night, some scholars think Akhenaten had a genuine medical condition, like Marfan syndrome. Others think the art was symbolic, meant to depict him as a union of male and female, human and divine. Either way, this pharaoh was not here to do things the usual way. Akhenaten doesn't just change the art and the capital. He changes the theology of Egypt. Aten is now the only god. Not just supreme, sole. He doesn't appear in animal form. He doesn't dwell in dark temples. He has no mythology, no family, no rivals. He is the sun, the source, the light itself. Akhenaten is his prophet, his translator, his vessel. It's a revolution dressed in white linen. But here's where things get messy. Outside of Amarna, the rest of Egypt is confused, and increasingly resentful. The priesthood of Ammonius is gutted. The economy, tied deeply to temple labor and trade, begins to falter. Traditional festivals are cancelled. Generations of divine tradition are erased like chalk from a temple wall. And the people? They don't really love Aten. They just fear that Akhenaten will notice if they don't pretend to. You walk through the streets of Akhenaten. They're strangely quiet. Clean, yes. Ordered. But missing something. Soul, maybe. Depth. Mystery. You find a shrine to Ammonius that's been smashed to rubble. A little clay statue lies half buried in the sand. Someone must have worshipped in secret. Someone must have missed the old gods. And here's your scholarly debate. Was Akhenaten the world's first monotheist, or was Atenism simply a royal cult, centered on one man's obsession? Some historians praise him as a visionary. Others see a dangerous egotist who alienated his people in pursuit of ideological purity. Both might be true. Nefertiti, meanwhile, remains a glittering enigma. She's not just a queen. She's depicted as co-regent, possibly even pharaoh in her own right after Akhenaten's death. Her famous bust, discovered centuries later, is still one of the most iconic artifacts in history. But what happened to her? Did she die early? Rule under another name? Scholars are still arguing, and probably will be until the sun itself burns out. And then there's the boy. Tutankhaten, born in Akhenaten, possibly Akhenaten's son. Just a child when his father dies. And in the aftermath, Egypt breathes in sharply, like someone waking from a trance. The city of Akhenaten is abandoned. The temples of Ammonius are reopened. The old gods are restored with a vengeance. And Tutankhaten? He changes his name to Tutankhamen. Living image of Ammonius. As you walk away from the bright, empty courtyards of Amarna, the sun dips behind a ridge of broken hills. The capital Akhenaten built crumbles faster than it rose. Statues are smashed. His name is erased from king lists. His monuments are reclaimed, or buried beneath newer layers of stone and story. Egypt, wounded but still itself, is coming home to what it knows: many gods, deep shadows, gold-covered ritual, and temples that whisper secrets through cool, silent halls. But the light of Aten? It lingers. Even now. The sun has barely climbed over the horizon, and already the workers at Thebes are stirring, hauling plaster, smoothing gold leaf, reciting prayers as they repaint the names that had been scraped away during Akhenaten's reign. The restoration project is colossal. Not just in stone and pigment, but in theology, politics, and national psychology. You've stepped into the reign of a boy king with more myth than memory, more mystery than monument. Tutankhamen. He's young. Maybe 9 or 10 when he becomes pharaoh. His throne is too big, his voice still cracking, but the weight of Egypt's 1,000-year legacy lands squarely on his thin shoulders. Luckily, he doesn't bear it alone. The real power behind the throne is wielded by 2 men, the elderly advisor, and Horemheb, the stern general. They don't look thrilled to be sharing power, but neither wants the chaos of another failed reign. Together, they begin the process of undoing the Aten experiment. Temples to Ammonius, Osiris, Isis, and Horus are reopened. Priests are reinstated. Akhenaten's name is scrubbed from monuments, king lists, and official records. The capital is moved back to Thebes, and the court does its best to pretend the Amarna period was a weird fever dream brought on by too much sun. You visit a workshop in Karnak where artisans are carefully repainting murals. One whispers, "We call it the heresy now." Another mutters, "The gods must be very tired." But Tutankhamen isn't just a figurehead. Slowly, under guidance, he begins issuing restoration decrees. His name appears beside sacred cartouches again. He commissions art and statuary in the old styles. And even though he's a teenager, he marries Ankhesenamen, Akhenaten's daughter, his half-sister, most likely, to help cement the bloodline and paper over the cracks in Egypt's divine narrative. Here's your quirky tidbit. Tutankhamen suffered from several congenital health problems, likely due to generations of royal inbreeding. CT scans and DNA tests suggest he had a club foot, malaria, and a fractured leg, possibly from a fall or accident. Historians still debate whether his death at around age 18 or 19 was due to injury, illness, or something less natural. And then there's his tomb. You walk the Valley of the Kings under a low, red sky. Most of the tombs are massive, grand corridors stretching into the hills, with rooms bigger than temples. But Tutankhamun's? It's small, cramped, rushed. Possibly not even intended for him. Yet inside, treasure. So much treasure that you can't even take it in with one glance. Thrones, beds, canopic jars, statues, boomerangs, sandals, food, perfume, all packed in with astonishing speed and devotion. And at the center of it all? A golden coffin nested within two others, containing the mummified body of Egypt's forgotten boy king, arms crossed, mask gleaming with obsidian eyes and lapis brows. A face made to last eternity. When British archaeologist Howard Carter opens the tomb in 1922, he famously whispers, "I see wonderful things." You imagine Tutankhamun's jaw blinking once in the afterlife, surprised anyone even remembered he existed. Historians still argue, why was Tutankhamun's tomb untouched? Did its small size keep it hidden? Was it forgotten in the bureaucratic shuffle? Or did his memory fade so quickly that no one bothered to rob it? Ironically, his obscurity preserved him. His legacy in life was brief. But in death? He became the most famous pharaoh in history, not for what he did, but for what was found with him. And after Tutankhamun, Egypt faces a delicate question. Who rules now? The answer, for a moment, is I, the aging courtier who crowns himself pharaoh and even marries Ankhesenamun. But his reign is short. He dies within a few years, and power shifts to someone far less diplomatic, Horemheb, the general. Horemheb rules with military precision. He restores central authority, punishes corrupt officials, and revamps the administration. His reforms are necessary, but firm. The Ammonius priesthood nods in approval. So does the army. And Egypt breathes out. A bit. But Horemheb dies without an heir. And so the 18th dynasty quietly ends, not with a fall, but with a handoff. The new torchbearer? A family of generals from the eastern delta, the founders of the 19th dynasty. As the sun sets behind the cliffs, you hear a quiet chant from Karnak. Priests pour offerings into sacred basins. A statue of Ammonius is carried on a litter through a columned hall. And in the far distance, the sound of chisels returns, carving not a new god, but an old one, made familiar again. Egypt has remembered herself. But for how long? The stone doors of Karnak swing wide again, and this time they don't open to a boy king or a sun-worshipping radical. They open to stability, military discipline, and a pharaoh who's more steel than gold. His name is Seti I, and with him begins the 19th dynasty's great repair project, restoring not just monuments and temples, but Egypt's global swagger. You watch him step into the throne room, not flamboyant, not gaudy, but commanding. A soldier pharaoh, Seti I isn't here to dazzle. He's here to reassert. His priorities? Rebuilding the empire that Akhenaten's theological detour and Tutankhamun's short reign allowed to slip through Egypt's fingers. Canaan, Syria, parts of Nubia. Foreign rulers got comfortable, forgot who the boss was. Seti's campaigns remind them. You follow him through the dust-choked valleys of Lebanon, the red hills of Moab, and the crumbling fortresses of the Levant. He takes back Egyptian outposts, wins military victories, and has the good sense to carve his triumphs into temple walls. The temple of Seti I at Abydos glistens with fine reliefs, each figure carved with such delicacy it feels like a divine press-on stamp. One wall lists all the pharaohs of Egypt, a king list that politely skips over the Amarna rulers, as if they were a dream no one wants to admit having. Here's your quirky tidbit. In that same temple, Seti includes a hidden hallway with inscriptions about mystical ceremonies involving Osiris, some so elaborate that scholars still call it the Hall of the Dead. Not creepy at all. Back in Thebes, the workers of Deir el-Medina are active again, carving Seti's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. It is spectacular. Vast, elaborately painted, and deeper than any royal tomb before it. You walk past scenes of the sun god's nightly journey through the underworld, each hour a perilous gate, each guardian stranger than the last. It's like an ancient graphic novel scripted in hieroglyphs. Seti's afterlife, it seems, has plot development. But Seti's reign, despite its accomplishments, serves as a warm-up act for the main event, Ramesses II, his son. And when Ramesses takes the throne, you can almost hear the limestone groaning in anticipation. He is crowned around 1279 BC, and from the moment he steps onto the royal dais, Egypt becomes his stage. This is not just a pharaoh. This is a phenomenon. Statues of Ramesses don't show him thinking or praying or looking humble. They show him towering, smiting, striding like he owns the Nile. And in a way, he does. You begin to notice it everywhere. Temples bearing his name, colossal statues outside cities, inscriptions proclaiming his strength. He builds Pyramus, a city in the delta with lavish palaces, military garrisons, and plenty of room for his dozens of children. He also builds at Abu Simbel, Karnak, Luxor, Abydos, Memphis, and anywhere else with unclaimed wall space. But let's talk about the Battle of Kadesh, Ramesses II's most famous, and possibly most exaggerated, military moment. Around 1274 BC, he marches north to fight the Hittites, another superpower vying for control of Syria. The result? A draw, if we're being honest. But if you ask Ramesses, it was a glorious solo victory, with him fending off thousands of Hittites alone, while his soldiers panicked in the background. You stand in the great temple of Abu Simbel, squinting up at a relief of the battle. Ramesses, in his chariot, bow drawn, horses charging, enemies falling like bowling pins. It's been called the world's first war propaganda, and you almost expect a caption that says, "No animals were harmed during the making of this victory." Open scholarly debate time. Did Ramesses actually win at Kadesh? Or was it a costly stalemate spun into legend? Egypt signed the first known peace treaty shortly after, so either way, both sides had had enough. Quirky detail: that treaty was written in two languages, Egyptian and Akkadian, and copies survive on both clay tablets and temple walls. It includes delightful phrases like, "May we never again attack each other's land while grass grows and water flows." Ancient diplomacy, poetic and practical. But Ramesses isn't all war and stone. He's also a father to possibly over 100 children, a patron of the arts, and let's not forget, the husband of Nefertari, whose tomb in the Valley of the Queens is a masterpiece of vibrant color, elegance, and tenderness. You walk its painted halls and feel something rare in royal tombs: love. By the time Ramesses II dies, at the age of about 90, after 66 years on the throne, he has become a legend in his own lifetime. Later Egyptians referred to him simply as the Great Ancestor. When the Greeks arrived centuries later, they're still hearing stories about him and likely refer to him as Ozymandias. Yes, that Ozymandias. And when his mummy is discovered in modern times, his hair is still tinged with red. You pause and look down at him, shrunk, weathered, but intact. A man who once inscribed himself into the cliffs of Nubia, now small enough to fit in a museum case. Tonight, Egypt is at its absolute peak, militarily strong, culturally radiant, economically rich. But you feel it in your bones, peaks don't last. For now, though, let the statues smile. Let the gods accept their incense. Let Ramesses recline beneath the stars, dreaming of chariots, temples, and a world shaped in his name. Because tomorrow, things begin to crack. You awaken in the long shadow of a statue so tall it casts a cool corridor across the sand. It's Ramesses II again, of course, one of many colossi bearing his name, his smirk, his eternal pose. But this time the air feels different. Drier. More brittle. You're still in the new kingdom. But you're entering its twilight. Egypt has tasted glory, conquest, and monumental excess, but now it begins to count the cost. You drift past the temples of Ramesses' successors, Merenta, Seti II, Sipta, Tuzret, and sense the growing weight of administrative overload and dynastic confusion. There are too many claimants, too many statues with half-finished names, too many funerary temples that never got their full set of pillars. Egypt isn't falling yet, but it's getting tired. Let's start with Merenta, son of Ramesses II. He takes the throne in his 60s. Imagine trying to run a superpower while learning how to use your first cane. His reign includes a few military campaigns, one against the Libyans and their Sea People's allies, which he records in triumph on the Israel stele. You stand before it now, the first known mention of Israel in the historical record. It's not much, just a line, but it glows with unexpected resonance. Quirky tidbit: Merenta also built a secret tomb within another tomb in the Valley of the Kings, Tomb KV8, with massive stone sarcophagi nested like Russian dolls. Each weighs several tons. Moving them must have been an engineering nightmare. Let's never do this again. You hear one worker mutter to another, 3,000 years too late. After Merenta, the succession spirals into a royal soap opera. Power passes from Seti II to the boy king Siptah, with Queen Tuzret, the wife of Seti, taking over as pharaoh in her own right for a brief and embattled reign. You feel the ground slipping. The court is plagued by internal conflict, corruption, and temple rivalries. That's when a new man steps forward, not royal, not divine, but military, Setnacht, who founds the 20th dynasty and is eager to clean up the mess. He does his best, but dies quickly. Then comes Ramesses III, the last pharaoh who tries to walk in the giant footsteps of Ramesses II. And at first, he pulls it off. Ramesses III strengthens the borders, revives temple projects, and, most famously, defeats the Sea Peoples, who come crashing into the Mediterranean world like a tidal wave of piracy and famine refugees. You watch from a fortified harbor as Egyptian archers line the coast, firing on waves of strange, helmeted invaders in ox-drawn carts and horned hats. His victories are immortalized in Medinet Habu, his mortuary temple near Thebes. The walls there show chaotic naval battles, tangled corpses, and triumphant pharaohs, classic New Kingdom drama. You read a line that says, "Their seed is not. Their hearts and souls are finished forever and ever." Strong words for someone who just barely held the line. But here's your open scholarly debate. Who were the Sea Peoples? No one knows exactly. Theories range from displaced Mycenaeans to Sicilians to climate refugees from collapsing Bronze Age economies. Whoever they were, they wrecked coastal cities across the eastern Mediterranean, Ugarit, Hattusa, Cyprus, but not Egypt. Egypt survives. But only just. Back at home, things start to unravel. Ramesses III's court becomes a web of intrigue, assassination plots, and economic crisis. Grain rations drop. Workers at Deir el-Medina go on strike, again, and this time they write their protest on papyrus. "We are hungry. We have no clothes. We are done." It's the world's first documented labor strike, and it's not a blip, it's a warning. And then, the royal harem conspires to murder the king. Yes, actual palace conspiracy. Ramesses III is attacked, likely throat slit, according to his mummy's injuries. You examine the body. His neck is sliced deep, his big toe hacked off, possibly from fighting back. In the following trial, dozens are found guilty: wives, priests, guards. Many are executed, others forced to commit suicide. You read the transcripts in a courtroom scroll. He was made to take his own life. Quirky detail: one of the conspirators may have been bitten by a snake while awaiting judgment. The court probably considered it a divine opinion. After Ramesses III, the dynasty continues, but thinner, hollower. Ramesses IV v. 6, all the way to Ramesses XI. So many Ramessides. So little impact. And in the background? The Ammonius priesthood grows stronger, almost acting as a state within the state. In Thebes, high priests of Ammonius begin to control taxes, land, temples, even military garrisons. You stand in Karnak's shadow and realize, the king wears a crown, but the priests write the paychecks. As night falls, you find yourself at a tomb robber's trial. These aren't looters in the dark, they're official workers, out of money, stealing gold from the very tombs they helped build. The Valley of the Kings is no longer safe, and neither is Egypt's legacy. The new kingdom isn't dead. But it's tired, stretched thin, bleeding from within. And soon it will fracture completely. So you sit beside the Nile one last time, watching the reeds sway, the stars blink, and the temples, those eternal temples, fade into silhouette. Egypt has ruled the world. Now the world starts ruling Egypt. The vultures come first. Not in a rush. Not in a frenzy. Just circling. 3, maybe 4 of them. Lazy arcs against the pale blue sky above the northern mesa, where the rocks bake all day and secrets go to dry out. You notice them one afternoon while walking the ridge, linen tunic damp with sweat, sandals grinding against the chalky gravel. Below you, Thebes slumbers in the sun, temples hushed and grain markets quieter than usual. Egypt is still standing, but she's alone now. It's the dawn of the third intermediate period, beginning around 1070 BC, and Egypt is about to get complicated. You return to the capital, or what's left of it. The royal palaces are still staffed, the scribes still tally grain, but Ramesses XI is gone, and no new strong pharaoh takes his place. Instead, the country does what it always does when no one's really in charge: it divides itself. Upper Egypt, especially Thebes, is now effectively run by the high priests of Ammonius. The crown still exists in name, but in practice? It's the priesthood that calls the shots, backed by temple land, armies, and the undying legitimacy of Ammonius Ra himself. Down in Lower Egypt, in the Delta, new families rise, Libyan chieftains who had long served as military commanders, mercenaries, and border guards. Their descendants intermarry with Egyptian elites, learn the language, adopt the customs, and then claim the throne. You stand in a court at Tanis, the new power center in the north. Here, Sheshankai, a Libyan strongman turned pharaoh, wears the double crown. The walls are inscribed with traditional scenes, offerings to the gods, smiting enemies, the usual pharaonic PR. But something's different. The art is less refined. The politics more fragile. Sheshank is legitimate, but only in part of the country. Egypt is now a land of parallel dynasties, often ruling at the same time in different cities. At one point, there are as many as 4 pharaohs ruling concurrently. No major invasions. No massive collapse. Just the slow, quiet splintering of what was once absolute unity. Open scholarly debate: was this a true collapse, or just a reshuffling of power? Some argue Egypt remained culturally intact, just decentralized. Others say the moment Egypt had to share the throne with priests and foreigners, it ceased being itself. Meanwhile, the temples are still operating, sometimes flourishing. Ammonius priests conduct elaborate festivals, maintain landholdings, and mint their own wealth. You slip behind the scenes at Karnak and see priests negotiating harvest contracts, arranging marriages, and managing sacred geese like their investment portfolios. And yet, there's a current of unease. You visit the royal tombs, or rather, what's left of them. The Valley of the Kings has been thoroughly robbed. Most of the king's mummies, those lucky enough, have been secretly moved to hidden caches by loyal priests. One such hiding place, discovered thousands of years later at Deir el-Bahri, held more than 50 royal remains, stacked like bundled linen, stripped of treasure but preserved with care. A quiet act of reverence in a world that no longer respected kings. Quirky tidbit: among these mummies is Ramesses II, packed away like a valuable old manuscript. When discovered in modern times, he was so well preserved that French scientists gave him a passport to fly to Paris for examination. Occupation listed? King deceased. Back in the third intermediate period, Egypt becomes a stage of passing alliances, half-thrones, and rising cults. There's even an Egyptian princess who becomes Queen of Kush, bridging the southern Nubian kingdom with Egypt's fading heritage. You watch her enter a court where half the officials speak Egyptian, half speak Meroitic, and all bow toward different gods. Still, the architecture continues: temples in Thebes, tombs in Tanis, burial sites near Memphis. But the scale is smaller, the craftsmanship coarser. Egypt isn't dying. She's just shrinking, quietly folding herself inward. One evening, as the last of the incense fades, you attend a ritual in a candlelit shrine. A priest reads from a scroll with trembling hands. He's not sure which date to record, year 15 of which king? Thebes or Tanis? He shrugs, adds both. You watch him fold the papyrus, seal it with wax, and whisper, Maat is still with us. And maybe she is. But the vultures overhead? They're not just watching anymore. They're waiting. The desert wind kicks up a veil of dust as you walk along a worn path outside Thebes. But this isn't just any breeze, it's history shifting direction again, this time from the south. You turn your gaze toward Nubia, where the golden lands beyond the cataracts have watched Egypt's slow fragmentation with patient, determined eyes. You're entering the era of the Kushite pharaohs, the 25th dynasty, when Nubian kings marched north, not as conquerors, but as restorers. The kingdom of Kush, centered at Napata, has been growing in power, wealth, and confidence. Its kings speak Egyptian, worship Egyptian gods, and model their rule on the pharaohs of old, maybe even better than the current batch-up in Tanis and Thebes. You stand in a royal court where statues of Ammonius wear southern features, and queens are called Kandake, riding chariots as regally as any Ramesside prince. The man who changes everything is Pi. Around 747 BC, he marches north to unify Egypt, not out of hunger for land, but out of reverence. His inscriptions don't boast of conquest. They speak of purifying temples, restoring Maat, and correcting chaos. You watch his army approach Memphis, not to sack it, but to liberate it from petty kings. Pi even writes about refusing rich bribes from northern rulers who offer him treasure in exchange for peace. He takes it anyway, and still conquers them. You follow Pi back to Napata, where he builds temples to Ammonius that mirror Karnak, sets up stele inscribed with oaths to the gods, and retires without fanfare. Egypt is in Kushite hands, but gently, purposefully. It's not colonization. It's adoption. It's rescue. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Kushite pharaohs revive pyramid building. But their pyramids are steep and narrow, with tiny chapels at the base and sharp points that pierce the Nubian sky. You visit one at El Kuru and find vivid murals of royal horses, solar barges, and protective cobras, all painted in ochre and lapis and silence. The dynasty continues with kings like Shabaka, who copies ancient texts onto stone to preserve them. One famous stela, called the Shabaka stone, contains a creation myth so old and philosophical, some scholars think it predates even the pyramid texts. In it, Ta, god of craftsmen, doesn't shape the world with his hands, but with his mind and speech. Egypt is remembering who she was, through the voice of her southern siblings. But, as always, the world doesn't sit still. Far to the northeast, Assyria is rising. You pass through Thebes during the reign of Taharqa, one of the most powerful Kushite pharaohs. He builds, reforms, fights. He appears in the Bible as the savior of Jerusalem. But he also battles the unstoppable machine of Assyrian expansion. His army slows them, but doesn't stop them. By 671 BC, the Assyrians under Esarhaddon invade Egypt. It's brutal, efficient, unsentimental. They capture Memphis, drive Taharqa south, and eventually sack Thebes, tearing down temples, looting treasuries, and sending a clear message: the age of isolation is over. Open scholarly debate: were the Assyrians true conquerors of Egypt, or just brief occupiers? Some argue they never fully integrated Egypt into their empire. Others see this moment as the start of foreign domination that Egypt would never fully shake off. As you wander through the burned-out ruins of a Theban temple, the contrast is jarring. The once proud capital is silent, its gods bruised but still watching from soot-stained walls. You pick up a broken amulet, an eye of Horus, and wonder whether its magic ever worked. In the north, a new power arises, the Sate dynasty, based in Sais in the western delta. These kings, like Samtik I, are native Egyptians. They reassert control, drive out foreign garrisons, and bring a moment of renaissance. Art becomes retro, statues in the old style, temples designed like Middle Kingdom blueprints. It's like a civilization trying to cosplay its golden age. You watch scribes recopying ancient texts. soldiers drilling in Greek-style helmets, priests chanting hymns that were already old when the pyramids were new. But you feel it. This isn't rebirth. It's a kind of nostalgic preservation, a careful effort to freeze time, to hold the tide. But tides don't ask permission. Quirky detail. During this safe period, Egypt becomes a hot tourist destination for Greeks. Visitors like Herodotus arrive, marveling at temples, asking confused questions, and occasionally making things up. No, Herodotus, the Nile doesn't start at the edge of the ocean and flow backwards. But thank you for trying. As the sun sets, you find yourself back at Karnak. A new governor walks by. He's speaking Persian. You blink. Already? Yes. The Persians are coming. Egypt is weary from holding herself together for too long. She's had Nubian kings, Libyan kings, priest kings, puppet kings. She's survived them all. But now, she's about to become a province in someone else's empire. Still, the temples remain. The river flows. And deep underground, her kings sleep beneath painted ceilings that still whisper. I am the son of Ra. I will rise again. You wake to the sound of boots. Not sandals. Not bare feet padding across temple stone. Boots, thick, foreign, dust-covered, and entirely un-Egyptian. The Persians have arrived. It's 525 BC, and you're standing in the shadow of a monumental shift. Egypt, for all her resilience, her divine kings, her gold-covered gods and rebounding renaissances, has been conquered, not by invaders with burning torches, but by an empire that plays a longer game. Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, marches in and claims the double crown like he's picking up a coat he forgot at a friend's house. The Battle of Pelusium sealed it. You weren't there for the clash, but you hear stories. The Persians used cats as shields, knowing the Egyptians wouldn't dare strike Bastet's sacred image. Historians still debate whether that story's real or just well-packaged propaganda. Either way, it worked. Cambyses walks into Memphis not with reverence, but with sarcasm. Some say he mocks Egyptian rituals, desecrates temples, even stabs the sacred Apis bull in a fit of rage. Others argue this is slander invented later to villainize him. We'll never know for sure. But you can feel the tension in the air. The old gods are still present, but now they whisper. They're not in charge. Egypt is now a satrapy, a Persian province. You walk through a garrison in Sais, where local soldiers now take orders from bearded governors in tall, fluted hats. Persian scribes write in cuneiform, side-eyeing the hieroglyphs etched into every surface. Taxes still flow, temples still function, barely, but the energy has shifted. Egypt is no longer the world's center. She's a valuable holding in someone else's game of chess. Quirky tidbit, Cambyses left Egyptian priests in place, as long as they paid tribute. The Ammonius priesthood, now seasoned survivors of 100 power shifts, adjusts again. You watch a high priest burn incense for both Ra and the Persian king, just to be safe. And then, shockingly, Egypt revolts. Psamtik III, a descendant of the Said kings, briefly reclaims the throne. But Cambyses crushes the rebellion with ruthless efficiency. From then on, Egypt will rebel again and again, nearly a dozen times over the next 200 years. But the victories are fleeting. Each time, the Persians return, more determined, more pragmatic. You see a kind of learned helplessness set in. Egypt still knows who she is, but no one else seems to care. Then, suddenly, the wind shifts again. It's 332 BC. You're in the delta, and a new name is spreading down the Nile like the floodwaters once did. Alexander. Alexander the Great arrives not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Persians are gone, routed in the east. And the Egyptians? They welcome him. He respects their gods, offers sacrifices to Apis, and allows local customs to flourish. He doesn't impose, he adapts. He visits Siwa Oasis, in the western desert, to consult the oracle of Ammonius. And when he emerges, he's changed. He believes, or wants people to believe, that he is the son of a god, the new pharaoh, destined to rule not just Egypt but the world. You stand with the crowd as Alexander is crowned in Memphis. A Greek and Egyptian regalia, cheered by both native priests and Macedonian generals. You wonder, do they believe it? Or are they just relieved that someone finally bowed to the old gods again? He doesn't stay long. Alexander heads east, conquering more lands, founding cities, one of which, Alexandria, will become the most famous in Egypt. But he dies young, far from the Nile. And Egypt? She is passed like a relic to his general, Ptolemy. And thus begins a new dynasty, not Egyptian, but Hellenistic. The Ptolemies will rule Egypt for the next 300 years, speaking Greek, importing ideas, marrying their own siblings, yes, even more enthusiastically than the earlier pharaohs, and founding a city that will hold the greatest library the world has ever known. But you'll get to all that soon. For now, as the sun sets over the now-hushed palaces of Sais, you listen to a Greek soldier ask an Egyptian scribe how to pronounce Thoth. The scribe shrugs. Just write it how it sounds. And so Egypt survives, not by resisting change, but by absorbing it, again and again. The gods sleep a little deeper tonight. But they are not gone. The wind smells like brine and papyrus ink now. You're standing on a limestone quay in a city that did not exist a century ago, and now feels like the center of the universe. Welcome to Alexandria, Egypt's new crown jewel, born from empire, soaked in ambition, and burning bright with books, ships, and scandal. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC, Alexandria was carved into the Egyptian coast like a statement. This will be the future. Its streets are laid out in perfect grids. Its harbor is full of ships from Greece, Phoenicia, India. The air is thick with salt, spice, and philosophy. And its lighthouse, yes, that one, is already being planned. But Alexandria isn't truly Egyptian. It's Greek Egypt now. The ruling dynasty, descended from Ptolemy I, Alexander's bodyguard and successor, speak Greek, dress like Macedonian generals, and worship Egyptian gods with Greek accents. Ptolemy doesn't claim to be a pharaoh in the old sense. He becomes one over time, draped in borrowed divine titles like ceremonial garlands. You walk through the newly founded Library of Alexandria, a sprawling complex of scrolls, scholars, and scribes. It's not just a library, it's an ideological machine, meant to gather all the world's knowledge and translate it into Greek. Ships entering the harbor are invited to hand over any texts for copying. Some are returned. Some, mysteriously, never leave. Quirky tidbit, the librarians supposedly tried to collect every book in existence, and if they couldn't find it, they'd write it themselves. Who needs a source when you can just invent one? Outside the library walls, Alexandria is a boiling cauldron of intellect and tension. Egyptians live here, but they don't run the city. Jews, Syrians, and Nubians cluster in their own quarters. The Greeks dominate the administration, the courts, the temples that now worship Serapis, a deity invented as a Greco-Egyptian compromise, with a beard like Zeus and a name fit for papyri. You pass the temple of Serapis and overhear a debate. Is he Osiris? Is he Hades? Is he both? A priest shrugs. He's whoever keeps the grain shipments running. Meanwhile, the Ptolemies are writing a very specific kind of royal playbook. Keep it in the family. Literally. Brother marries sister. Then their children do the same. The bloodline stays tight, the power tighter. You stand awkwardly at a wedding where Ptolemy II marries Arsinoe II, his sister. Everyone applauds. No one flinches. Welcome to Hellenistic Egypt. Then comes a woman who changes everything, Cleopatra VII. She's born into a tangle of backstabbing relatives, revolts, and Roman interference. But from the moment you meet her, standing in a silk-draped audience hall, speaking fluent Egyptian, fluent Greek, and probably fluent diplomacy, you know she's different. She's clever. She's calculating. She's charismatic. And yes, she seduces Julius Caesar, but more importantly, she negotiates with him. She presents herself not just as a queen, but as Isis reborn. Her presence blends religion, royalty, and performance so seamlessly that the lines disappear. Open scholarly debate. Was Cleopatra truly beloved by her people, Or was her power propped up mostly by Roman alliances? Some say she was a cultural chameleon, beloved by Egyptians for embracing native customs. Others argue her dynasty was always viewed as foreign rule with divine branding. After Caesar's death, you follow Cleopatra as she courts Mark Antony, the Roman general who sees Egypt as both lover and prize. Their alliance is romantic, strategic, doomed. They challenge Octavian, future Augustus, for control of the Roman world, and lose. The Battle of Actium, in 31 BC, isn't just a naval defeat. It's the final curtain for pharaonic Egypt. Cleopatra and Antony retreat to Alexandria. You walk the palace halls as their world collapses. Rumors fly, Octavian is coming. Rome is done playing polite. Then, the end. Cleopatra dies, by ASP, dagger, poison comb? No one agrees. But the message is clear. Octavian enters the city soon after. Egypt is absorbed into the Roman Empire. No more pharaohs. No more crowns. Quirky closing detail. Octavian, now Augustus, has her son Caesar Ion executed, just in case anyone thought the old bloodline might still matter. Egypt is no longer independent. It's a province now. A glowing ornament in Rome's imperial crown. A land still full of gods, but none of them rule anymore. As night falls, you stand on Alexandria's shore, watching ships slip out to sea. Somewhere, a copy of Homer is being shelved. Somewhere else, an old priest of Ammonius extinguishes a candle. And though the throne is empty, the gods are still listening. The wind blows colder off the Mediterranean now, and the once mighty temples lie half buried in sand, their reliefs worn soft as linen. You're in Roman Egypt, a place of memory, mirrors, and slow, dignified decay. The year is somewhere around 30 BC, and Egypt is no longer Egypt in the way it once was. She is a jewel, yes, but no longer a crown. After Octavian's victory at Actium, Egypt becomes the personal property of the Roman emperor. Not just a province, a private estate. Augustus knows the value of Nile grain, and he's not about to let the Roman Senate get its hands on it. He appoints a prefect, never a senator, to govern in his name. Rome trusts no one with this kind of power. You walk through the offices of this prefect, surrounded by Greek-speaking clerks, Roman tax assessors, and Egyptian scribes. Everyone's speaking different languages. Everyone's slightly annoyed. And Alexandria? Still dazzling. Still crowded. Still unequal. The city becomes a cultural powder keg. Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Romans, all living on top of each other in tension. And theology. The philosopher Philo of Alexandria tries to reconcile Judaism with Greek philosophy. Pagan temples still perform rites while Christianity quietly spreads house to house, scroll to scroll. And then comes Pliny, Strabo, Juvenal, Roman writers who describe Egypt with a mix of fascination and patronizing amusement. To them, Egypt is a place of quaint superstitions and peculiar gods, where people worship crocodiles and cats and mummify ibis birds by the millions. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have uncovered entire cemeteries of mummified animals, ibises, baboons, bulls, prepared with more care than some Roman citizens buried in the suburbs of Rome. But deep beneath the imperial satire, Egypt is still Egypt. You pass by the temple of Isis at Philae, still active well into the Roman era. Priests still light incense. Pilgrims still whisper prayers. Roman emperors like Trajan and Hadrian build new shrines in traditional Egyptian styles, not because they believe, necessarily, but because they know it matters. You stand before a massive stone gateway. It bears an image of the emperor, dressed not in a toga, but in the full regalia of a pharaoh. Crook and flail. False beard. Sun disk above. To the people of the Nile, it's a comforting lie. To the empire? It's public relations. But even lies have power. Still, you notice the cracks. The temples are more museum than sanctuary. The priests more bureaucrat than mystic. The hieroglyphs carved now are rote, imitative. The language? Already dying. Here's your scholarly debate. Did Egyptian religion survive the Roman conquest, or did it only appear to? Some say the rituals continued unbroken. Others argue they became theatrical echoes, performances with no real audience. And then, everything shifts again. In 284 CE, a Roman soldier named Diocletian takes power. He reorganizes the empire and launches one of its last, most efficient persecutions of Christians. Egypt, with its thriving Coptic communities, suffers. Monks are hunted. Scrolls are burned. Churches are desecrated. But the Christians don't disappear. They hide in the desert. You follow one such figure, Anthony the Great, who walks into the eastern desert around 270 CE and stays there, fasting, praying, shaping a movement. From this solitary act is born the tradition of Christian monasticism, and Egypt becomes its unlikely cradle. By the time Constantine legalizes Christianity in the early 300s, the tide has turned. Isis fades. Osiris drifts into myth. Ammonius grows silent. The old gods recede into dreams and carvings, their temples slowly converted into churches, then ruins. You stand inside a once sacred hall at Luxor, now echoing with chants in Coptic, Greek, and Latin. A cross has been etched carefully over a forgotten cartouche. No anger. Just replacement. Quirky transition fact: some temple sites, like Philae, remain active until the 6th century CE. It's the last gasp of pharaonic faith, performed under Byzantine oversight. When the final priest locks the final door, Egypt's ancient religion doesn't die. It sleeps. As you watch, sand begins to cover the lentils. The Nile changes course slightly. Scrolls crumble. The old language is forgotten, letter by letter. And yet, something stirs. You glance at a trader's pouch. Inside, a fragment of papyrus, covered in strange symbols. One day, someone will read them again. But for now, Egypt waits, under Roman rule, under Christian rule, under layers of wind and time. The gods are gone. But the stories? They are patient. The wind no longer carries incense, or the hum of temple chants. It carries the call to prayer. It's the 7th century CE, and you're standing on the ramparts of a crumbling Roman fort in Babylon on the Nile, just south of what will one day be Cairo. The air is thick with dust and tension. To the east, an army approaches, not with catapults or elephants, but with something quieter and far more enduring. Islam. In 641 CE, the Arab general Amr ibn al-As leads the Rashidun army into Egypt under the banner of Caliph Umar. The Byzantines, exhausted and bitter, retreat slowly. The Copts, weary of persecution under Roman Christianity, don't resist as fiercely as expected. You hear whispers in monasteries. Perhaps these new rulers will let us be. Open scholarly debate: was the Arab conquest a liberation for Egyptian Christians, or just a softer domination? Some argue it brought relative tolerance and reduced taxes. Others see it as a long, slow squeeze on identity, language, and autonomy. In time, the old Roman fort becomes a nucleus. A new city grows around it, one that eventually becomes Fustat, then Cairo. The language shifts. Arabic takes hold. The Coptic tongue recedes to liturgy alone. You find yourself writing grocery lists in a script the ancients wouldn't recognize, and praying to a god they never named. And yet, the Nile still floods. The grain still grows. You pass a market and see an old woman wearing an egg-shaped pendant, disguised as a cross. Perhaps, or simply because it's always brought her luck. Beliefs, like rivers, have tributaries you can't trace. Quirky tidbit: when Amr enters Alexandria, he's shown the library's ruins. Legend says he burned the remaining books to heat the city's bathhouses. Most scholars doubt this. By then, the library had already been destroyed several times over. Still, the idea lingers like smoke. Egypt changes. Under the Umayyads, then the Abbasids, it becomes a vital piece of the Islamic world. Arabic architecture flourishes, mosques with towering minarets, geometric patterns inlaid into stone, no idols, no images, just sweeping lines and sacred verses. And then, in the 10th century, the Fatimids arrive from North Africa. They build a new city, Al-Qahira, the victorious, in 969 CE, and Cairo becomes Egypt's heartbeat. You walk through her alleyways centuries later, where Mamluk sultans commission madrasas, fountains, and minarets that pierce the sky like spears of devotion. Egypt, though ruled by foreign powers, sets the cultural tone for the Islamic world. Scholars, poets, doctors, all gather here. Meanwhile, down south, the ruins of Luxor and Karnak sleep under layers of earth. Peasants plow the fields beside sphinxes without names. The past has become landscape. Yet traces linger. A merchant sells charms shaped like scarabs. A folk healer invokes Sekhmet under a different name. Children skip stones across canals that once carried offerings to Osiris. And then comes a new empire. In 1517, the Ottomans take control. Egypt becomes a province again, this time of Istanbul, not Rome. The sultans rule from afar, letting Mamluk elites hold power locally. You sit in a tea house and hear both Turkish and Arabic in the same breath. The Nile, ever loyal, continues its work. Quirky detail: even under Islamic rule, certain ancient temples were repurposed. At Philae, Christian frescoes were painted directly over hieroglyphs. Later, Islamic inscriptions joined them. One wall carries the sacred texts of three civilizations, side by side, like reluctant neighbors sharing a fence. And now, the world grows hungry again, for power, for history, for curiosity. It's the late 18th century. And Europe is coming. Not to conquer, at least not yet, but to dig. To catalog. To obsess. Napoleon lands in Egypt in 1798, accompanied not just by soldiers, but by scholars, engineers, artists. The description de l'Egypte is born, and with it, a tidal wave of Egyptomania that will sweep through Europe. Suddenly, everyone wants a pyramid in their backyard. And in 1799, a soldier digging near Rosetta finds a black basalt slab. The Rosetta Stone. 3 scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. It's the key. The first breath of a language long held in silence. But that story's not quite done yet. For now, as you stand on a dusty hill watching Cairo shimmer in the distance, you realize Egypt never really fell. She shifted. She adapted. She held on. The gods may sleep. The temples may crumble. But the river still knows their names. You're back on the banks of the Nile now, but this time, you're wearing a sun hat. A wide-brimmed one. Linen shirt, maybe a notebook in hand. Because it's the 19th century, and you're not just here to admire the scenery. You're here to dig up the dead. This is the age of rediscovery, when the West turns Egypt's ruins into both a playground and a trophy cabinet. Archaeologists, adventurers, and outright looters pour in from Britain, France, Italy. They call themselves Egyptologists. They also sometimes call themselves Lord or Colonel, which should tell you something. And at the center of it all? That little black slab we ended with last time, the Rosetta Stone. Discovered in 1799 during Napoleon's expedition and promptly captured by the British, it becomes the golden key in the hands of one Jean-François Champollion, who finally cracks the hieroglyphic code in 1822. Suddenly, those silent walls and sleeping gods have voices again. You stand in the Louvre as he reads aloud the names of pharaohs no one's spoken in millennia. It gives you chills. Quirky fact: for decades, scholars thought hieroglyphs were pure symbolism, mystic gibberish. Turns out, they were part phonetic, part poetic, and all business. Pharaohs had receipts. Now that Egypt can be read, the race begins to dig it up. You follow Giovanni Belzoni, a former circus strongman turned tomb raider, as he dynamites his way into pyramids with more enthusiasm than finesse. You see mummies shipped to Europe to be unwrapped at dinner parties. Yes, actual Victorian mummy unwrapping parties. That's a thing that happened. Open scholarly debate: was this curiosity or colonial theft? Some argue that without Western obsession, we'd know far less about ancient Egypt. Others point out that most of what was taken never came back. Meanwhile, in Egypt itself, something else is happening. The Ottomans are still nominally in charge, but real power has shifted to Muhammad Ali Pasha, an Albanian officer who basically declares himself king of Egypt in the early 1800s. He modernizes agriculture, the military, and even sponsors Egyptian antiquity digs, but always with an eye toward European favor. His successors build on that trend, most famously with the Suez Canal, completed in 1869. It links the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, turning Egypt into the busiest shortcut in global trade. You watched British and French engineers toast each other on decks of glittering steamships while locals dig and die in the background. And then, predictably, comes the takeover. In 1882, Britain occupies Egypt under the pretense of stabilization. But really, it's about controlling the canal and locking in imperial interests. Egypt becomes a British protectorate in everything but name. Cairo glitters with colonial architecture, and Khedive rulers wear European suits over Ottoman titles. Still, Egyptian pride is not dead. You walk through marketplaces and hear locals quoting the ancient kings. Schools begin teaching Arabic again. And in dusty university halls, young men dream of independence, not just from Britain, but from centuries of being someone else's province. Quirky tidbit: Egyptian nationalists sometimes invoke the pharaohs as symbols of sovereignty. We ruled ourselves for 3,000 years before any of you showed up. By the early 20th century, whispers become speeches. Speeches become protests. And by 1922, something else rises from the ground. Tutankhamun. You're in the Valley of the Kings when Howard Carter and his team pry open a sealed door and stare into wonderful things. Gold, jewels, beds, chariots, linen robes that still hold the ghost of scent. And at the center, the boy king, untouched, undisturbed, waiting. Tutmania explodes across the globe. Newspapers scream. Museums beg. Egyptian pride soars. And finally, in 1952, a young military officer named Gamal Abdel Nasser helps lead a revolution that ends the monarchy, ends British dominance, and declares Egypt a republic. At last, after centuries of outsiders calling the shots, Egypt belongs to Egyptians again. You watch the flag raised over Cairo. And somewhere, in the breeze, you swear you hear the echo of a temple chant. Because Egypt has always known how to wait. It's 1956 now, and you're standing in the heart of Cairo as something seismic unfolds, not in the ground, but in the soul of the nation. Gamal Abdel Nasser, the charismatic young president, has just done the unthinkable. He's nationalized the Suez Canal. Imagine it. A single televised speech. A calm voice. And suddenly, one of the most vital waterways in the world, until now controlled by British and French interests, is claimed for Egyptian sovereignty. People pour into the streets. There's shouting, hugging, singing. Some cry. You can almost feel the earth vibrate with relief and reckoning. Of course, the West doesn't take this lightly. Within months, Britain, France, and Israel launch a coordinated military assault, hoping to force Egypt to back down. The world watches in horror and disbelief as this Suez crisis unfolds. But then something astonishing happens. The United States and the Soviet Union, locked in Cold War tension, agree on something. They both pressure the European powers to stand down. It's a rare, weird alliance, and it works. The invaders withdraw. Egypt keeps the canal. Nasser becomes not just a national hero but a symbol across the Arab world. Charismatic, sharp-jawed, and dressed in suits with just enough military shine, he champions pan-Arabism, socialism, and non-alignment. In African capitals and Middle Eastern towns, children are named after him. Quirky tidbit: Egyptians start printing currency with Nasser's face, right alongside images of the pyramids and Sphinx, as if to say, yes, he belongs here too. But the glow doesn't last forever. Nasser's socialist experiments stir hope and chaos in equal measure. Land reform benefits the poor but angers the elites. Nationalizing industries gives Egypt independence, but bureaucracy multiplies like papyrus reeds after flood season. Then comes 1967. You're by a transistor radio when the Six-Day War breaks out. Israel launches preemptive strikes against Egypt and its allies. In less than a week, Egypt loses the Sinai Peninsula, and its air force is nearly obliterated. Cairo goes quiet. The streets empty. Statues of Nasser seem to droop in the sun. He offers to resign. But millions of Egyptians flood the streets again, this time not in triumph, but in defiance of defeat. They beg him to stay. He does. And yet, the magic is fading. When Nasser dies in 1970, over 5 million people attend his funeral. Some weep like they've lost a father. Others whisper, "Was he the last real pharaoh?" Open scholarly debate. Did Nasser's rule truly mark the return of Egyptian autonomy, or was it a modern echo of centralized, semi-authoritarian pharaonic tradition? Some see him as a liberator. Others as a populist whose promises outstripped his results. His successor, Anwar Sadat, takes a different path. He opens the economy to Western investment, launches the infida, economic opening, and tries to balance tradition with globalization. In 1973, he leads Egypt into the Yom Kippur War, a surprise assault on Israel to reclaim Sinai. Though it ends in a military stalemate, it restores a sense of national pride. But Sadat doesn't stop there. In 1979, he signs the Camp David Accords with Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, mediated by U.S. President Jimmy Carter. Egypt becomes the first Arab nation to officially recognize Israel. The world gasps. Some cheer. Others burn flags. In Cairo, the peace is bittersweet. Many Egyptians crave stability. Others call Sadat a traitor. His Nobel Peace Prize glitters. So do the knives. In 1981, during a military parade, Sadat is assassinated by Islamic extremists in full view of the cameras. You watch the grainy footage on a television in a downtown cafe. The silence afterward is a deeper blow than any gunfire. And into that silence steps Hosni Mubarak. A former Air Force commander, Mubarak promises continuity, and delivers it for 30 years. 3 decades of tight control, political stagnation, and carefully managed modernity. Under his rule, Egypt's economy grows and fits. So does the youth population, jobless and frustrated. Meanwhile, the pyramids stay put. Tourists flood Giza. Souvenir sellers peddle cheap scarabs made of plastic. Beneath the sand, archaeologists still dig, still dream. Somewhere near Luxor, someone is brushing dirt off a newly found tomb. Quirky detail. In 1995, workers uncover a previously unknown shaft beneath the Sphinx. Some believe it leads to a secret chamber. Others scoff. But for a moment, the world remembers, Egypt still has secrets. And in the cafes and kitchens of Cairo, people talk. They talk about bread prices, about corruption, about freedom. They text, they blog, they post. And one day, they take to the streets again. But that's tomorrow's story. For now, the Nile flows steady, indifferent and eternal, while Egypt waits once more on the edge of change. It's January 2011, and you're standing in Tahrir Square. Or at least, a version of you is, holding up a sign you scrawled at 3 a.m. on the back of an old notebook. There are thousands of others just like you. Young, old, rich, poor, Christian, Muslim, all chanting one word. Iral. Leave. Hosni Mubarak has ruled Egypt for nearly 30 years. That's longer than most of the people in this crowd have been alive. He's a fixture. A photograph in every office. A voice on every news broadcast. A man whose grip on power seemed as permanent as the pyramids. Until now. Inspired by protests in Tunisia, Egyptians rise. Not with swords or guns, but with cell phones and courage. Tweets replace torches. Facebook becomes a battlefield. And this square in downtown Cairo becomes the heartbeat of a revolution. Quirky tidbit. One protester brings a sign that says, "Pharaohs had 30 years. Yours are up." Ancient history has always been a part of Egyptian identity, but now, it's wielded like a megaphone. For 18 days, the world watches. Tear gas. Singing. Clashes. Mass prayers. Makeshift clinics. A man plays the violin as rubber bullets fly. Women link arms around men in prayer. It's chaos and unity, anger and hope. You feel it in your chest, like electricity humming just under the ribs. And on February 11th, it happens. Vice President Omar Suleiman appears on TV, stiff and gray, and reads a short, stunned sentence. Mubarak has stepped down. The streets erupt. Horns blare. Strangers embrace. Cairo doesn't sleep that night. Or the next. For a fleeting moment, it feels like anything is possible. But revolutions are rarely tidy. In the months that follow, Egypt enters a dizzying carousel of transition governments, military rule, referendums, and elections. The Muslim Brotherhood wins a majority. Mohamed Morsi becomes Egypt's first democratically elected president in 2012. And yet, not everyone cheers. Open scholarly debate: was Morsi's election a true expression of democracy, or the start of a different kind of authoritarianism? Some argue he represented the people's voice. Others say he overreached, too fast, too far. By 2013, millions are back in the streets again. Same square, new fears. This time, it's General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi who emerges. With military support and popular backing, he removes Morsi from office and later becomes president himself. Some hail him as a stabilizing force. Others call it a coup in slow motion. You walk through Cairo once more, and it looks familiar but heavier. More cameras. More checkpoints. More silence. But also, more infrastructure. Roads widen. Buildings climb. The government proposes a new capital city in the desert, designed with wide boulevards and spotless fountains. Meanwhile, tourism flickers. The pyramids still stand, but fewer buses idle nearby. Still, you see a new generation of guides, Instagram-savvy and multilingual, leading masked visitors through temples older than language. Ancient Egypt sells well, even when modern Egypt trembles. Quirky fact: in 2021, the world watches a grand choreographed spectacle, the Golden Parade of the Pharaohs, where 22 royal mummies are moved from the old museum in Tahrir to the new National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. Streets are lined with lights, orchestras swell, and the sarcophagi roll past like celebrities. Even Cleopatra might have blushed. There's pride in it. A reclaiming. Because Egypt, for all its scars and swerves, has always known how to layer itself. Past over present. Sand over stone. Silence over revolution. And here you are now, in the present day, where now cruise ships chug slowly through history, where satellite dishes sprout on rooftops older than electricity, where kids in Luxor play soccer beside temple columns that once held up the sky. You sit on a balcony in Aswan. A fan hums softly. The air smells like grilled corn and river breeze. Somewhere nearby, a boy sings a song passed down through centuries. You don't know all the words, but you know the tune. And when you close your eyes, you can still hear footsteps in the sand, sandals against stone, ink drying on papyrus, gods breathing through granite. You are in modern Egypt, but it's not modern in the way the world thinks. It's something older. Something patient. Something that waits for no one, and yet carries everyone. You blink slowly in the golden heat, standing now at the threshold of a country that is somehow all of its past at once. Egypt in the 2020s feels like walking through a layered dream, part museum, part revolution, part shopping mall with 3,000 years of baggage. You're in downtown Cairo, watching as rideshare scooters zip past donkeys pulling carts of onions. Someone streams K-pop on their phone while a grandmother mutters an old prayer in Arabic that still echoes like something from a stela. The skyline is pierced by both satellite towers and minarets. You're constantly swiveling your head, not sure if you're looking at 2024 or 1324 BC. Egypt is building again. The government pushes forward on massive infrastructure projects, new highways, expanded rail networks, and above all, the ambitious new administrative capital, rising in the desert like a mirage. Glass and concrete skeletons climb toward a sky once ruled by Ra. They promise cleaner streets, less congestion, digital efficiency. But you've been around Egypt long enough to know, the soul is still in the old stones. Quirky tidbit: In 2023, engineers moving a construction site near Saqqara stumble across a sealed cache of 250 painted sarcophagi, undisturbed for millennia. Inside? Priests, nobles, and one mummy with a solid gold tongue. Nobody saw that coming. Back in the heart of Cairo, the Grand Egyptian Museum finally prepares to open after years of delays. Perched beside the Giza Plateau, it's a sleek, futuristic building meant to showcase over 100,000 artifacts, many of which have never been seen by the public. You walk its vast corridors before opening day, guided by the faint scent of dust and linen. In one wing, King Tutankhamun's entire burial collection, reunited for the first time since Carter first cracked open that door. In another, colossal statues of Ramses II, whose gaze still seems to challenge time itself. And somewhere in between, a quiet exhibit on everyday life, pots, sandals, love letters scribbled in demotic on scraps of linen. Because history isn't just thrones and tombs. It's people worrying about dinner, about the weather, about what comes after. Open scholarly debate. Will Egypt's future be shaped more by heritage tourism or technological innovation? Some experts say it must lean on its ancient legacy to thrive. Others argue true power lies in renewable energy, agriculture reform, and digital economy, things the pharaohs never dreamed of. You step out of the museum and back into the light. The pyramids loom to your left, timeless, defiant, and a boy selling postcards waves at you like you're an old friend. A busload of schoolchildren points at the Sphinx and argues whether it smiled. You smile too. In Aswan, the high dam still holds back the Nile, changing the river's rhythm forever. In Alexandria, young poets sip coffee near Roman ruins, writing verses that would make Cleopatra smirk. In Minya, a farmer prays for rain the same way his ancestors did, with both hope and resignation. And in the south, near Abu Simbel, you watch tourists marvel at a temple relocated stone by stone to save it from rising waters. It took international cooperation, engineering miracles, and thousands of laborers to preserve that sacred space. But isn't that Egypt in a nutshell? Rebuilding itself, even as it crumbles. Quirky fact, there's an ongoing theory, still debated, often giggled at, that ancient Egyptians had access to some kind of lost sonic technology. How else, the fringe thinkers whisper, could they have moved 200-ton stones with such precision? Historians shake their heads. Engineers shrug. The mystery lingers. And maybe that's the point. Egypt isn't just history. It's mystery. A place where you can walk into a temple and feel time hesitate, just for a second. Where a revolution might begin with a tweet, but end in a proverb carved in limestone. Where children memorize both the Quran and stories of Isis and Osiris. And as the sun sets over the Nile, again, always, you lean against a warm stone wall that could be 4,000 years old and realize Egypt didn't last this long by accident. It mourned and adapted, cracked and calcified, danced and drowned, rebuilt and reclaimed. It let itself be ruled, robbed, forgotten, celebrated, and somehow, it's still here. And so are you. Another witness. Another footstep in the dust. You're floating now. Not metaphorically, well, also metaphorically, but truly, you're adrift on the Nile, on one of those slow-moving feluccas with white sails like wings stretched to catch the ancient wind. The water laps gently. The sky melts from gold to lavender. And the river, this river, has carried more history than you could ever write down. It's seen crocodiles and caliphs, flood rituals and ferry boats, papyrus rafts and party yachts. Every bend of it has a secret. Tonight you drift past fields being plowed by hand, just like they were when Khufu was king. Past boys on donkeys texting on phones. Past temples collapsed into reeds, their columns now homes for birds. The contrast never dulls, it only deepens. Because Egypt doesn't erase the past. It layers it. Quirky fact, the Nile doesn't technically flow south to north because it wants to confuse you. It does so because of gravity. The source is in the highlands of East Africa, and the Mediterranean lies below. Still, it's disorienting. Egypt is one of the few places where Upper Egypt is actually south. You pass Kalmambo, the double temple devoted to Sobek, the crocodile god, and Heriris, the falcon. Two gods, one temple, perfectly symmetrical. Sobek, who protected the people but was also feared. You peer into a small adjacent museum where dozens of mummified crocodiles lie in neat glass cases. Yes. Mummified crocodiles. Because ancient Egyptians mummified everything: falcons, cats, ibises, bulls. Even scarab beetles. If it breathed, it might have gotten bandaged. Open scholarly debate. Did Egyptians believe all animals had divine aspects, or were some mummified purely as offerings? Scholars still argue where reverence ends and ritual economics begin. Night deepens. Stars appear. And now you're approaching Edfu, Temple of Horus. It's one of the best preserved temples in Egypt because it was buried under layers of desert and mud for centuries. Protected by time's indifference. You step inside and feel dwarfed by the scale, by the carvings so crisp they feel fresh. You run your fingers across a wall etched with a ritual reenactment. Horus defeating Seth. Order over chaos. Light over dark. Egypt has always loved a good duality. And yet, it has also embraced contradiction. It is a place of immense poverty and unimaginable treasure, of sacred traditions and blaring pop music, of harsh control and soft revolution. You stand beside a man selling Pepsi in front of a temple that once held jars of lotus wine. You wonder which would have tasted better. Back on the boat, you pass sleeping fishermen. Their nets look like spider webs stretched over dreams. You pass camels, noses lifted toward a sky their ancestors have watched since before the pyramids rose. A train rattles in the distance, and its headlight looks for all the world like a falling star. You begin to think, maybe, that Egypt doesn't really live in time at all. It lives outside of it. Because how else could a civilization persist, shape shift, collapse, and resurrect itself for more than 3,000 years? Quirky tidbit. In 2018, archaeologists opened a sealed black sarcophagus found in Alexandria. Internet theories exploded. "Don't open it, or we'll unleash a curse," they joked. Inside? Just 3 skeletons floating in reddish sewer water. Disappointing, unless you ask the scientists, who were thrilled. Because every discovery here is a thread. A stitch in a quilt that's been sewn and resewn through sandstorms and revolutions. And you? You're now a piece of it too. Tomorrow, the boat will reach Luxor. You'll walk among the colonnades of Karnak, whisper through the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, stand before the fractured colossus of Memnon, whose stones once sang at dawn. Yes, they sang. Or so said the Greeks, who heard the wind sighing through its cracks and called it a god's voice. Open scholarly debate. Was it wind erosion or acoustic engineering? Historians still ponder whether the ancients intended it, or just got lucky with a monument that grown back. But tonight you drift. The Nile is your lullaby. The sky a velvet canopy. The horizon hums with stories not yet told. And when you close your eyes, it's not sleep you fall into. It's history. You wake to the sound of oars slicing through the river, rhythmic, unhurried. Dawn stretches over the horizon like a spilled bowl of honey, and the Nile blushes with it. The boat drifts into Luxor, ancient Thebes, city of kings and gods and high priests with eyes like judgment. And you step ashore. Here, history doesn't whisper, it bellows. Every stone beneath your feet once mattered to someone. A decree. A death. A coronation. An eclipse. You walk carefully, like stepping across someone's diary. Because in Luxor, the past hasn't ended, it's just paused. First stop, Karnak. More than a temple. More than a ruin. Karnak is a cosmic engine, a holy machine built to sustain the universe. At its peak, it sprawled over 200 acres, echoing with hymns, incense, chisel strikes, and political intrigue. This wasn't just a place to worship the gods, it was a place where power was sculpted into stone. You pass through the avenue of the sphinxes, their lion bodies guarding silence. Then through hypostyle halls with 134 towering columns, each so wide it could hide a secret between 2 ribs. You crane your neck until it aches, looking up at the painted stars still faintly visible above. Quirky tidbit. One of the columns bears graffiti from ancient Greek tourists, who couldn't resist carving their names and poorly drawn ships. Even 2,000 years ago, someone was ruining the view. You wander deeper. An obelisk stands, slender and impossible, etched with the name of Hatshepsut, the queen who became pharaoh. Her legacy, once nearly erased, still gleams in stone. The hieroglyphs scream, "I was here. I ruled. I mattered." You walk on, toward the Valley of the Kings. It's quiet here. The air changes. There's a weighted hush, as if even the breeze lowers its voice. Beneath your feet lie dozens of royal tombs, cut deep into the desert's bones. Some are modest. Others sprawl with entire subterranean palaces, designed to guide the dead pharaoh through the afterlife's perils. You enter KV-62, the tomb of Tutankhamun. You duck under lentils, shuffle through tight passages. The walls are painted with spells and stars, boats for the soul, protective deities mid-snarl. His gold funerary mask, now housed in Cairo, once lay right here, on the boy king's face. So much mystery. So much weight for someone who died at 19. Open scholarly debate. Was Tutankhamun's death natural or political? Some suggest he died from an infected fracture, others from malaria, or perhaps, darkest theory of all, a blow to the head. The truth is still entombed somewhere between forensic science and the gods. You leave the valley and stand in the open sun, gazing across the Theban hills. Somewhere out there, other tombs sleep still, undiscovered. Egyptologists believe dozens, perhaps hundreds, remain. Waiting. Watching. Then, to the west, the Ramesseum, the mortuary temple of Ramses II. Its fallen statue, once 60 feet tall, lies in pieces, face down, like it collapsed from exhaustion. Shelley's Ozymandias echoes in your ear. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. But the despair doesn't last. Because Egypt isn't about endings. It's about cycles. Life, death, renewal. Sunsets that turn into sunrises. Floods that give way to grain. Kingdoms that fall, only to be dreamed of again. Quirky fact, the Book of the Dead wasn't a single book, but a collection of spells and instructions, often custom-made. Wealthy Egyptians would pay scribes to pen their own versions, like commissioning a travel guide for eternity. And as the day wanes, you sit by the colossi of Memnon, two massive statues that once fronted the lost temple of Amenhotep III. They've stood for 3,400 years, enduring earthquakes, floods, tourists, and time. In the early mornings of antiquity, one of them was said to sing, a phenomenon caused by dew evaporating through cracked stone. Today, they're silent. But not empty. You place your hand on the stone knee of one, warm from the sun, and feel the vibrations of a memory older than empires. Not a sound, but something. Something that says, you're not the first. You won't be the last. But you're part of it now. You're written into Egypt. You leave Luxor behind in a soft cloud of dust, and the road unwinds before you like a ribbon laid over time. You're heading north now, toward Ibis, a place lesser known than Giza or Karnak, but whispered about with reverence by those who understand the deep roots of Egyptian memory. The landscape shifts, palm groves give way to wide fields. Children wave from donkey carts. And somewhere in the distance, you spot the shimmer of limestone under sun. Ibis. To the ancient Egyptians, this was more than a holy site, it was the portal to the afterlife. The final stop on a pilgrimage no less sacred than Mecca or Jerusalem today. Pharaohs prayed to be buried here. Nobles paid fortunes to have even a cenotaph, a fake tomb, erected in the sacred soil. Why? Because Ibis is the mythical burial site of Osiris, lord of the dead. You arrive at the temple of Seti I, and immediately the mood shifts. Unlike other temples, this one is hushed, even solemn. The reliefs are carved with a gentler hand, the figures elongated and flowing, as if the gods here are whispering instead of roaring. Open scholarly debate, was this temple built by Seti or completed by his son, Ramses II? Inscriptions name both, but scholars argue over how much was finished in Seti's lifetime. Either way, father and son worked together across decades, and you feel that continuity in the very stones. You enter a side chamber, the air cool and dry. And there it is, the ibis king list. A wall of cartouches, each one naming a king, stretching from Menes to Seti himself. This isn't just a family tree, it's a declaration of legacy, of legitimacy. But curiously, some names are missing. Like Hatshepsut. Like Akhenaten. Like anyone who disrupted the story the priests wanted to tell. Quirky tidbit, right above this hallway is the so-called helicopter hieroglyph, where overlapping carvings from different periods accidentally created shapes that resemble a modern helicopter, submarine, and UFO. Fringe theorists go wild over it. Egyptologists just sigh. You leave the temple, and the wind carries dust in soft swirls, like the desert is breathing. Not far from here lies the Osirian, a subterranean chamber built with cyclopean stones, older and stranger than anything above. Some believe it's symbolic, a burial for the god himself. Others whisper it predates Seti by centuries. The stone blocks are so massive, it's hard to imagine how they were placed. Some weigh more than 100 tons. The chamber feels less like a tomb and more like a vault. Or a memory. And perhaps that's what Abydos really is. Not a monument, but a memory palace, built for gods, guarded by time, soaked in rituals you'll never fully understand. You walk away slowly, the sound of your footsteps muffled by sand. Your thoughts drift. Because Abydos wasn't just the end of the road for ancient pilgrims. It was a beginning. Here, pharaohs dreamed of joining Osiris. Of becoming more than men. Of being absorbed into the cosmic cycle, reborn with the sun, living forever in grain and river and stone. And you? You're just passing through. But now you carry part of that dream, too. You carried the weight of eternity in your pocket like a smooth pebble. Small. Cool. Quiet. From Abydos, the desert deepens. The further you drift from the Nile's green embrace, the more Egypt shows its bones, rock, wind, and quiet that stretches for miles. Now you're entering a landscape that once seemed uninhabitable, and yet here it is, the land of the oases. You find yourself bouncing along a two-lane road toward Siwa, a place so isolated, even Alexander the Great had to beg the gods for directions. Quirky fact: when Alexander set out to visit the Oracle of Ammonius in Siwa in 331 BC, a sandstorm supposedly saved him, redirecting his caravan when they became lost, guiding them like a divine GPS. Or maybe it was just a good scout. Historians still argue whether he went for prophecy or PR. Siwa is Berber, not Arab. The language here is older than the Quran, and the date palms sway with secrets. Mud brick homes blend into the landscape like sleeping camels. The people still press olives by hand, still draw water from ancient springs that bubble up like soft miracles. You arrive just before dusk. The air is honeyed with salt and dust, and the mountains around you ripple with petrified coral. Yes, this was once an ocean floor. And somehow, that feels appropriate. In Egypt, the past is never what it first seems. At the heart of Siwa stands the Temple of the Oracle, where Alexander knelt and asked if he was a god. The priest's answer is lost to time, but the impact wasn't. He left more convinced than ever that he was the son of Zeus Ammon. You climb the crumbling slope to what's left of that temple. No tourists. No guards. Just you and the wind. And when you reach the top, the view stretches forever. An ocean of sand, shimmering gold, broken only by green palms clinging to life. It's the kind of silence that teaches you something. Not in words, but in pause. Egypt isn't just a land of cities and temples. It's a land of waiting. Open scholarly debate: was Siwa's oracle a political tool, a religious authority, or both? Some scholars argue it was merely theater. Others say it genuinely influenced major decisions. The truth? Somewhere between the incense and the crown. You sleep that night in a traditional lodge made of salt blocks and palm trunks. Your pillow smells faintly of dates. The stars overhead are so clear, you feel like you could reach into the sky and rearrange constellations. The next day, you ride a bike past mud brick ruins. Through the mountain of the dead, where tombs were carved into soft limestone. Some still hold faded paintings, ink symbols, jackal-headed gods, stars like stitched sequins. You run your hand gently along a painted ceiling and realize these people weren't afraid of death. They prepared for it like a journey. Packed a bag, wrote notes, wore their best amulets. You stop by a well, cold and fresh, said to have healed Alexander's thirst. And as the water touches your lips, you understand something else. Egypt's not defined by what it built. It's defined by what it refused to lose. Its language, its sun, its faith in cycles. Even in the most forgotten corners, like Siwa, Egypt remembers itself. Every palm tree and crumbling tomb says, "I was here. I mattered. And so do you." You linger a little longer. Because this isn't just history anymore. It's a kind of anchoring. A reminder that even the most remote places can hold entire empires in their dust. That every grain of sand once knew a name. And tomorrow, you'll follow that sand further. You trade the sands of Siwa for the coast, and just like that, Egypt changes again. The desert hush gives way to sea breeze, and you step into a city that once rivaled Rome in brilliance. A place of scrolls, scholars, storms, and secrets. Alexandria, founded by Alexander, perfected by Ptolemies, and later carved by empires, this city has worn more faces than a pharaoh's coffin mask. Today, it buzzes like any modern port, traffic horns, cafe laughter, seagulls overhead. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the scratch of a reed pen on papyrus. You walk the shoreline, boots crunching seashells. Somewhere beneath your feet lies the Pharos, once the tallest structure on earth, the lighthouse of Alexandria. It stood over 100 meters tall, guiding ships with polished bronze mirrors that caught the sun by day and flames by night. Quirky tidbit: the Pharos was so famous, its name became the root for the word lighthouse, in over a dozen languages. Parts of it now lie submerged off the coast, where divers still explore its fallen stones like underwater treasure hunters. But that's not the reason you came here. You're looking for ghosts. Specifically, the ghosts of knowledge. You head inland to the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the modern reincarnation of the lost library of Alexandria. Its circular, tilting roof mirrors the rising sun, as if to say, "We're trying again." Inside, the light filters down through narrow slits, illuminating over 1,000,000 books, quiet readers, digital archives, and a hopeful hum of scholarship. But none of it can fully replace what was lost. The original library once held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, gathered from across the known world. Papyrus from India, scrolls from Greece, astronomical charts from Babylon. And then, gone. Open scholarly debate. Who burned the Library of Alexandria? Theories abound. Julius Caesar's fire. Christian mobs. Caliph Omar's army. Or maybe it simply decayed, neglected by centuries too focused on conquest. Historians can't agree. All that's certain is this: the light dimmed. You wander through the museum exhibits. Fragments of text, coins, tablets. A shard of pottery bears a faded diagram of the solar system. Someone, somewhere, once tried to map the stars by candlelight. You pause by a statue of Hypatia, the mathematician and philosopher murdered by a mob in 415 C. A woman of reason, cut down by fear. Her story feels eerily modern. Outside, you follow the curved corniche past seafood vendors and crumbling Ottoman mansions. Alexandria still echoes with pluralism: Greek, Roman, Arab, Jewish, Berber, Coptic. Layers of identity, stacked like layers of sediment. The city hums with hybrid energy. You stop by the catacombs of Qalm el-Shokafa, where Roman-style columns meet Egyptian funerary art. A carved Anubis wears a Roman soldier's uniform. Fusion. Collision. Coexistence. Quirky fact: in 1900, a donkey fell through the earth here, revealing the catacombs by accident. That poor, unsuspecting beast may have made one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. And now, as the Mediterranean wind tugs your coat, you realize this city never stopped being a lighthouse. It still draws seekers. Still casts ideas into the dark. Still warns of rocks, and promises new shores. And you? You're the same as every scholar who came before, eyes wide, pen ready, hungry for meaning. You stand on the edge of what was lost, and dare to imagine what might still be found. From Alexandria, you head inland one last time, past irrigation canals and traffic-choked roundabouts, until the chaos thins and the sky opens above you like an old scroll unfurling. You're entering Cairo, or rather, what lies beneath it. Because modern Cairo is a symphony of noise and neon, but old Cairo, ancient Cairo, was Memphis. Not the Elvis one. The original Memphis, capital of the first unified Egypt. You stand now among crumbled stone and palm-shaded ruins, where once the palace of Narmer might have stood, the king who wore both crowns, red for Lower Egypt, white for Upper, and declared that two lands would henceforth be one. Quirky tidbit: the name Egypt itself comes from the Greek Aegyptos, which was a corruption of Hakupta, a name for a temple of Ptah in Memphis. So technically, the whole country is named after a shrine. You walk into the MIT Rahina Museum, open air, breezy, sun-dappled, and there he is, Ramses II, massive and horizontal, too tall to stand upright in the building. His toes alone are bigger than your head. His smile is cracked but still present. Regal, even in sleep. Then comes the shift. From stone to bone. You head deeper into Coptic Cairo, past the Hanging Church and the Ben Ezra Synagogue, past tight alleyways and ancient prayer stones rubbed smooth, and eventually into the Islamic Quarter, where minarets pierce the sky and the call to prayer drifts like warm incense through the dusk. You've crossed thousands of years in a single cab ride. Open scholarly debate: was Memphis truly the first capital, or just the best preserved? Some historians believe earlier cities predated it, perhaps buried still beneath Nile silt. But Memphis left a bigger stamp. It told the world, this is where civilization begins. And as night falls, you climb to the citadel, built by Salah al-Din in the 12th century to defend against crusaders. From here, the view stretches across Cairo, glowing windows, honking cars, satellite dishes sprouting like steel flowers. Somewhere out there lies the Giza Plateau. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight, Cairo is a lullaby sung in multiple tongues: Arabic, Coptic, Greek, Nubian. Hieroglyphs no longer spoken aloud. And yet, still heard. Quirky fact: some of the stones used to build early Cairo were repurposed from pharaonic temples. If you look closely at certain mosques, you might find a block with a scarab beetle carved into it. Recycling, ancient style. You walk slowly back through Khan el-Khalili, the market that never sleeps. Spices hang in the air: cardamom, anise, sweat, saffron. Trinkets jingle. Someone tries to sell you a replica of Nefertiti's bust. Another swears their alabaster cat is blessed. And you believe them. A little. Because this is Cairo. A city where old gods wink from behind new glass, and a taxi driver can recite the names of kings buried for 3,000 years. You stop at a cafe. Order mint tea. Listen to the hum of 1,000 years vibrating in the marble tabletop. Egypt began here. And in a way, it never left. Even the sand here smells like stories. Even the silence is written in ink. You've reached the end of the map now, the last curve of the Nile before it kisses the Mediterranean goodbye. But Egypt, as always, has one more twist tucked behind its curtain of time. You stand on the Giza Plateau. The city thrums behind you. Motorbikes, prayer calls, school bells. But ahead? Just wind and stone and the stubborn refusal of time to erase monuments built 4,500 years ago. The pyramids don't appear gradually, they ambush you. One moment you're sipping water on a tour bus, and the next, they're just there, huge, angular, looming with a don't you dare attitude that doesn't fade, no matter how many pictures you've seen. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, centerpiece of the trio, was once sheathed in polished white casing stones that caught the sun like a mirror. Today, it looks rough, weathered, but unbowed. You crane your neck. It doesn't end. It dares you to imagine hauling 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing over 80 tons, without wheels, cranes, or excuses. Open scholarly debate. How exactly was it built? Ramps? Internal spirals? Alien subcontractors with a union? No one agrees. That mystery is part of the spell. You walk around the base. Touch the cool limestone. Each block feels like a heartbeat, faint, ancient, steady. You slip inside, ducking into a low, narrow passage that smells like dust, sweat, and forever. The grand gallery rises like a corridor carved for gods. You whisper. The echo answers like a ghost that's been waiting. At the top, the king's chamber. Empty, except for a granite box. No gold. No mummies. Just stone and silence. Still, you feel watched, not in a spooky way, but like the room is listening. Like it's remembering all the feet that walked here before yours. All the breath. All the belief. You emerge blinking into the light and turn toward the Sphinx. Its paws stretch like a cat in the sun, its body scarred by time and bullets and wind, its face partly gone, but still regal. Still challenging. Still whispering riddles to those who bother to ask. Quirky tidbit: Napoleon's troops didn't shoot off the Sphinx's nose. That's a myth. It was likely destroyed in the 14th century by a Sufi cleric who viewed the statue as idolatrous. Ironically, that act made it immortal in imagination. You sit on a nearby ledge as the sun sinks. The horizon bleeds gold and violet. The pyramids cast long shadows, longer than any king's reign. You think of everything you've seen. Narmer's crown. Hatshepsut's temple. Akhenaten's revolution. Ramses' swagger. Cleopatra's last breath. Alexandria's lost scrolls. Siwa's oracle. Cairo's layers. And now this, the tombs of stone that outlived every tomb raider and every priest. Historians call Egypt a civilization of endurance. But that's too clinical. Too neat. Egypt is a heartbeat caught in stone. A story so old, it became the very dust you're sitting on. It's not just about pharaohs or gods. It's about trying to matter in a world that forgets so easily. And somehow, they did it. They carved meaning into mountains. Buried dreams in golden coffins. Lit bonfires of knowledge in desert libraries. And when their cities fell, they whispered from their ruins. Build anyway. Believe anyway. Because time doesn't erase meaning. It distills it. And as night folds in, you realize you've been walking with the dead for 3,000 years. And they never felt more alive. So now, let it all slow. The sand settles. The stars come out, blinking softly like tiny memories in the sky. You sit by the river's edge one last time. The Nile moves gently beside you, the way it always has, like a lullaby for the land. It's quieter now. The pharaohs have said their piece. The gods have receded back into myth. And you've walked every era. From the first mud brick shrine to the last echo of Cleopatra's sigh. From pyramid to papyrus. From gold masks to forgotten tombs. You've heard whispers in hieroglyphs, felt the breath of desert wind at Ibis, watched the moon rise over Luxor's ruins. Egypt never rushed. It waited for you. It taught in the way of old things, patiently, wordlessly, with the weight of everything that's ever mattered. And now that you've listened, really listened, you can feel it settle inside you. Like dust in your shoes. Like warmth in your chest. There's no need to chase more. You've already been to the edge of history, where stone speaks and silence explains everything. So breathe deeply now. Let your shoulders fall. The pyramids will still be here tomorrow. The Nile will still murmur someone's name. And in this moment, wrapped in moonlight and memory, you're part of it. Not just a tourist or a student or a dreamer, but a witness. Close your eyes. Let the echoes carry you. Sleep well, traveler. Sweet dreams. Hey guys. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means a lot and I look forward to bringing you new topics soon. Stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you